Thank you. And our first item of business this afternoon is time for reflection. And our time for reflection leader today is the Reverend Ian MacDonald, Senior Minister at Holy Trinity Church, Wester Hailes, Edinburgh.
Presiding Officer, members, thank you for this opportunity to address you today. As you may know, one of the duties and indeed privileges of the Christian faith is to pray for leaders and those in authority. And I want to assure you that we, the Kirk, pray for you regularly before the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. And I might add that we pray for you and not against you, despite what somebody might have told you. Thank you for your hard work and your service, particularly whenever you've demonstrated compassion to the poorest in our communities. May I start with a question? What do the sewing machine, insulin treatment for diabetics, and the double helix structure of DNA have in common? The answer is they were all claimed to be revealed by a vision. And vision is something that is so important for the people of Scotland today. The Bible says that where there is no vision, the people cast off restraint, but happy are the people who keep the law. I believe there is a lawgiver, a reason for the seemingly inexplicable fact of why the observable universe of vast solar systems and myriad galaxies of minutest quarks and gluons obey laws. Christians believe God has revealed himself as lawgiver, not only in the world around us, but also in Scripture, and the one to whom we must give account. Those laws on which our whole justice system is based are boundaries that protect us, and applied in love, they add to the happiness of the people. It can feel exhilarating to throw off those laws for a moment. Perhaps for some in our society it's felt exciting casting off the Judeo-Christian ethic that has cemented Western society for two millennia. But casting off all restraint does not free people, but leaves so many in our communities alone, addicted, and without purpose. I once watched a game of rugby union where a tackle came in with such force that the leg went back at the knee. It has to be imagined rather than described. And the TV camera showed it from every single possible angle. That leg was completely free, but it was useless. It was never designed to be like that. I speak today to those entrusted with enacting laws that set the boundaries of freedom in Scotland today. But if our laws and freedoms are to bring happiness to our nation, for that we need vision. Vision is not something you get after the pressing matters of the day are out the way. Vision never comes about by committee. And if the Church of Scotland and the Parliament have one thing in common, it may be committees. No, vision comes about when a man or a woman sees what could be. I've served in the people of Wester Hailes for the past 13 years. We have a vision where loneliness and addiction and purposelessness are only spoken of in the past. It's a vision, I believe, that local churches in local communities are ideally placed to provide the answer to. And if myself or the community I serve lack vision, there is an ancient prayer that is available to all and even to members today. It was turned into a very famous, timeless hymn. It simply says, "Be thou my vision." Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Reverend. And the next item of business is one that we would all prefer not to be holding, a motion of condolence following the death of our former presiding officer and colleague, Sir Alex Fergusson. Alex and I started together, both of us enjoying the privilege of being elected to Parliament as part of the first intake of MSPs in 1999. He came to this place having lived a life outside of politics, and he never lost that real-world take on the issues before us. Alex was both impassioned and knowledgeable on matters relating to rural Scotland and in particular on issues affecting the southwest of this country. Allied to his natural good humour, his intelligence and approachability, when Alex spoke, people listened. This is still a relatively young Parliament, but when we look back at events of significance in its development, among them will undoubtedly be Alex's election as Presiding Officer in 2007. It was a year when the people of Scotland decided to elect our first ever minority government, a situation which gave rise to new political challenges to match that changing political dynamic. In those uncharted waters, the Parliament needed someone who could be trusted, who was fair and balanced, someone who was liked and respected across the parties, and of course, we turned to Alex. But as I alluded to earlier, Alex was not a career politician. He did not seek high office. He got into politics later than most, out of a sense of duty and service, and to give voice to the issues and causes he believed in. At Westminster, MPs play out a little scene on the election of their chosen Speaker when the successful candidate is dragged reluctantly from the green benches to the Speaker's chair. And with Alex, this was no metaphorical enactment or political playlet, but the reality of his sense of duty, winning out over his own political priorities. With Parliament at an impasse, Alex agreed to accept the role of Presiding Officer thrust upon him. And as the evidence of the time in office reveals, this Parliament demonstrated its wisdom in electing him. It takes a special talent, after all, to navigate the Parliament's first minority government, to vote down a £33 billion budget bill, to notoriously mix up a football semi-final cup draw, and to constantly break the disappointing news to uninformed correspondents that he was not responsible for picking the Manchester United first team. Many of us not only admired Alex's many qualities and talents, we would be proud to emulate his example and end up leaving this place with more friends than when we were first elected. When news came of Alex's untimely death, I was struck not only by the kind words of fellow MSPs, but by the fondness with which he was remembered by the parliamentary staff, from those who worked alongside him in private office, to the clerks, researchers, IT and other support staff. It was apparent that the feelings of shock and sadness were not exclusive. Kind words for a man who always had a kind word to those he met, a true gentleman. In saying goodbye to Alex, Parliament is saying goodbye to a good friend who made a great mark on this place. Our thoughts and prayers are very much with his wife Merrin and the wider family who we are honoured to have with us in the public gallery today. Goodbye, Presiding Officer. Goodbye, Alex. Thank you very much for your service and friendship. I now call on Ruth Davidson to move the motion of condolence.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, in August memorial service for Sir Alex Fergusson that you attended along with your predecessors, the Deputy First Minister and many others here today, we came together to commemorate a life well lived, a life of public service, of duty and of profound decency. Today we come together again, and it is right and fitting that this Parliament meets to remember one of its own, our third Presiding Officer, the first that we have lost, a politician who served here for 17 years, and I think it is fair to say was not just respected, but loved too. At that remarkable memorial service in Kirkcudbright Parish Church 6 weeks ago, it was impossible not to be so moved by the stories that came flooding forward from those whose lives had been touched by Alex. From David Mundell, the Scottish Secretary, who described him as the most thoroughly decent man that he had the good fortune to meet, to befriend, and to have instruct him in the way of sheep farming. From Alex's brother John, whose wonderful eulogy captured not just the panic of Manchester United fans on social media at the announcement of Alex's passing, but also all the humour and the humanity and the truly terrible driving habits of the man. And we heard from Alex himself, telling us in his own words to belt out the hymns that he had chosen for the service, and how, in his final days, he was without regret or bitterness. He had gone, but his humanity breathed on that day, gloriously. For me, the most telling contribution was the comment that was relayed from one of Alex's medical staff, who said that they'd watched the family around him in his final days, and what a closeness and a love he saw between them. What a legacy. We are so pleased today to be able to welcome his wife Merrin, his mother Oriel, brother JG, sister Henrietta and youngest son Christopher to the Parliament. We thank you for lending Alex to us, even for a short time. It was time well spent. For the Scottish Conservatives, Alex's death has left a huge hole, but it is right to say today that he was first and foremost a parliamentarian, and it is this Parliament which mourns him together today. It's fitting too that today we welcome 60 pupils from Dalbeattie High School in Alex's patch. As a champion of the region and of young people in interest in politics, he would have loved to have seen you all here. Because Alex was not a career politician. He was a farmer, taking over management of the family farm and bar in Carrick in 1971. He was soon getting involved in life beyond the farm gate. As the former MSP Murray Tosh, his close colleague and friend, has observed, he felt his own beloved southwest of Scotland had its own distinct interests, which needed to be represented more effectively. And so it was from his own lived experience that his political career began. Characteristically for a Scottish Conservative, his first attempt to get into politics failed. But when he stood for the South Carrick ward in 1995, but he had got the bug. And when in 1997 the devolution referendum was passed, he decided to stand for this new Parliament. He was always a committed devolutionist, something that he was to pursue all his career, including as a member of the party's Strathclyde Commission, which in 2014 recommended a series of wide-ranging increases in the Parliament's powers. In the 1999 election, he did not win his constituency, but he was elected on the party list. And as one of 129 new MSPs, he soon stood out. The Scotsman diarist Rab McNeill coined him Hercules, thanks to his fine public bearing and his star turn alongside Alex Johnson in the annual tug-of-war. The ribbing was always affectionate, and when Alex retired in 2016, Rab was to declare, "It's a great shame he's retiring, because for a Tory, he came heavily disguised as a human being." And I couldn't possibly comment. But Alex stood out in other ways too. He didn't go in for personal attacks and had fine relations with Alistair Morgan, the SNP MSP who'd beaten him to the Galloway and Upper Nithsdale constituency. But people soon learned not to mistake his personal courtesy for weakness. On the issues that mattered to him, he was tough and uncompromising. As David Mundell said last month, when Foot and Mouth hit in 2001, Alex emerged as the most dogged and best-informed challenger of the Scottish Executive's handling of the crisis. That was because, in private, he was every day speaking to individual farmers and businesses from all over Scotland, listening to their concerns, offering support, and connecting them to people in power. In 2003, that hard work paid off when he won the Galloway and Upper Nithsdale seat, and 4 years later, after another term, putting the interests of his constituents first, he increased his majority from 99 to 3,333. It was 2007, the SNP had just won the election by a single seat, and neither SNP nor Labour were able to give up an MSP for the vacant post of Presiding Officer, so Alex was sounded out. His first concern was whether in that job he would still be able to represent his constituents. Having been assured that that was the case, he took it on. And faced with the unprecedented nature of minority government, his courtesy, his wise judgment and steeliness were to stand him in good stead. Whether in reprimanding the former Labour MSP George Fowkes for unparliamentary behaviour, because there are always small pleasures in politics, or in dealing with SNP ministers to ensure the business of government kept going. And he was a fine representative of Parliament outside of it too. In 2009, he took a delegation of MSPs to New Zealand. And during the visit, the group were informed that they were due to go to Amari, which is a sacred place in Maori culture, where it is standard practice for the Maori hosts to sing to their guests and for the guests to respond in turn. And as a man of music and a folk singer of some renown, Alex wasn't going to let that challenge go missing. And I'm told that he therefore hustled Ted Brocklebank, Ross Finney, Rhoda Grant and Sandra White into a kind of Scotland's Got Talent outfit. with Alex demanding that they spent the entire evening practising how to sing Psalm 23, because he always did like a shepherd. And I'm told that the Scottish Parliament's choir's rendition the following day was indeed spectacular. Typically, Alex did not see the role of presiding officer as a full stop, so in 2011 he insisted on staying on as a constituency MSP, and it was his personal connection and affinity with the South West which assured that in an election when the SNP swept the board, Alex was re-elected for a third time. A former head of the Blackface Sheep Breeders Association, he was appointed as president of the Royal Highland Agricultural Society in 2012, something which I know he took immense pride in. And then 2 years ago, fittingly, he was knighted in the Queen's Birthday Honours for a life of unceasing public service. Even as he was falling ill earlier this summer, that service continued. As a patron of the Galloway National Park Association, he continued to campaign for Scotland's third national park, and I hope very much, with the campaign continuing, the creation of such a park in Galloway may just be a legacy for him. 3 weeks before he died, he was still commentating. When two of our Scottish Conservative group wrote a joint piece from opposite sides of the debate, backing a compromise deal on Brexit, Alex took to Twitter to declare, "What a welcome and sensible dose of straight-up, no-nonsense common sense. More, please." He knew full well at that point that he wouldn't see Brexit negotiations conclude, but he was still engaged, still passionate, still urging the practical, realistic way forward. And my word, couldn't we do with more Alex Fergusons right now? For all his titles and honours and appointments, Alex was simply a good man, a lover of sport, of music, of burns, of a decent meal, a glass of wine and a whisky, of family and of friends, of his community, a man who knew that we are nothing unless we uphold the ties that bind us, who understood that common courtesy is important, that passionate debate is vital, that politics is about service to others and not to oneself. And at that wonderful memorial service in August, we were all reminded too that he was a family man who was so proud of his 3 sons and the wider family, a family who gave him a send-off to remember. The example and the humanity of Sir Alex Fergusson will stay in our hearts for some time to come. We offer his family our deepest condolences in their loss, and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, and I now call the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
Presiding Officer, on behalf of the SNP and the Scottish Government, let me join in supporting the motion from Ruth Davidson. Like all of us across this Parliament, I was so very saddened to hear of Sir Alex Ferguson's passing, and I'm very glad that his family are able to join us today to hear us pay tribute to a very special human being. As we've heard already, frontline politics did come to Alex relatively late in his life. Before his election, he had a long, distinguished and successful career as a farmer. And that experience of farming and land issues undoubtedly contributed to his decision to enter politics. In 1999, he of course became one of the initial intake of MSPs to the Scottish Parliament. And those of us who were privileged to be elected to that first Parliament, we're all acutely aware that whatever our differing political views, we had a duty to ensure that we helped create a Parliament that lived up to the expectations of all those who had campaigned for it, but also a Parliament which was able to prove the sceptics wrong. And few members of that first Scottish Parliament, in my view, embodied that spirit better than Alex. My personal memories of Alex when I first got to know him were of someone who was just as concerned about upholding the reputation of this Parliament as he was about advancing his own political beliefs. He had the particular gift of being able to argue his own case with rigour, and he did argue it with rigour, while remaining on the friendliest of terms with political opponents across the chamber. This, of course, served him extremely well during the early years of the Parliament when he was a distinguished convener of the Rural Development Committee. His period as chair of that committee coincided with the aftermath of the foot and mouth outbreak in 2001 and the passage of the Protection of Wild Mammals Act on hunting. And I think it says a huge amount that his handling of these and other sensitive issues only served to enhance his reputation. Colleagues on the committee recall how he was always willing to take on and off his political hat, reminding different parties of the bigger picture and highlighting to MSPs that being political opponents did not have to mean becoming political enemies, and perhaps all of us would do well to remember that in the times we live in today. These traits, of course, received fitting recognition in 2007 when Alex became the Scottish Parliament's third presiding officer. At the time of his election, his predecessor, George Reid, said that, and I quote, "You have just elected a decent and honourable man to head this House." George's remark was borne out completely by Alex's time in office. Alec, of course, as you, Presiding Officer, have noted, was the first Presiding Officer to serve during a period of minority government. As I am sure you recognise, Presiding Officer, that is not always a straightforward task. However, he was highly effective in his role. Those on the SNP benches who sat in the Parliament's Business Bureau during those years talk about the important role that Alex played, banging heads together behind the scenes when that was necessary. Above all, he fostered trust between the party's business managers, enabling them in turn to chart a way forward in which everyone had a voice. And in public in this chamber, Alex always chaired proceedings with calm authority and scrupulous fairness. This meant that even in circumstances which could have been contentious, for example when he used his casting vote to defeat a budget bill, all sides understood and respected the reasons for his decision, even if I may say it might have taken the then Finance Secretary some time to realise that he understood and respected the decision of the Presiding Officer. But that approach that Alex took was a major factor in the success of that third Parliament. Alex also ensured that backbenchers were given as much of a voice in proceedings as possible, and he was not afraid to put his foot down when that was needed. I'm sure I'm not the only frontbencher here today who can remember developing a strange sixth sense, if I had perhaps gone on a bit too long in my answer, which of course I rarely do, that Alec was peering over his glasses at me, telling me to get on with it. And as Presiding Officer, Alex was also a fine ambassador for Scotland, as Ruth Davidson has noted. For example, playing a really important role in supporting and strengthening this Parliament's relationship with the Malawi Parliament. Presiding Officer, in Alex's final speech in this chamber, he said that being Presiding Officer was a privilege and an honour. And I'm quoting him here when he said that it came close to that of serving the people first of the south of Scotland, then of Galloway and Upper Nitsdale, and latterly of Galloway and West Dumfries. And the order of priorities there, I think, is telling. Alex's sense of duty to his constituents ran right throughout his parliamentary career. In 2011, he, of course, became the first Presiding Officer to stand for re-election. And the fact that he won the redrawn Galloway and West Dumfries constituency says so much about the effectiveness with which he served his constituents and about the affection and respect he earned as a result. And of course, even after stepping down from this Parliament, Alex continued to campaign on issues such as creating a new national park in the Galloway Forest. Sir Alex Fergusson made a major contribution to Scotland as a whole, but there's no doubt he was a particular champion of the South West. It's often said that political parties are like big extended families. That's certainly how I feel about my own. And in that spirit, we all recognise that those in the Scottish Conservative benches today have lost one of their most revered and respected family members. But across the chamber, we have all lost a colleague and a friend, someone who will be noted in future years as having played a pivotal role in the early period of the Scottish Parliament. But no one will feel his loss more than his family. So today, as we mourn Alex's passing and as we mark his many achievements, we also offer our condolences to Merrin, Ian, Dougal and Christopher, and also, of course, to Alex's mother and brother who join us today. I hope that the tributes they hear today from across the chamber will give them not only some comfort, but also a justifiable feeling of immense pride.
Thank you, and I now call on Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I rise on behalf of the Scottish Labour Party to pay tribute to Sir Alex Fergusson and to support this motion. A son of the manse, he made his mark in the first days of this Parliament by moving a motion to introduce a time for reflection. And I went back to look at his inaugural speech in that debate. I strongly believe, he said, that with the new Parliament we have a new beginning. I see no reason why we should not have a new all-embracing form of contemplative thought or prayer as part of our parliamentary procedure. And the Fergusson motion was duly passed by 69 votes to 37 with 15 abstentions. He began in Parliament as he meant to go on, making a great impression and making a great difference. On the 24th of November, in that first year of Parliament, up on the mound in a debate on land reform, he began by declaring four interests. I am a landowner, a landlord, a farmer and a member of the Scottish Landowners Federation. Extraordinarily, he then went on to agree with a young, radical, extra-parliamentary land reformer called Andy Whiteman, who had condemned the proposed legislation for not going far enough. And in that same speech, Alex went on to disagree profoundly with one Rosanna Cunningham, whose assertion the year before in the House of Commons that what was needed was, and I quote, the ultimate ownership of land by and for the people of Scotland, was lampooned by Alex. That system, he said, was tried by the communists, and look what happened to them. I also read his final contribution to Parliament, which was on the 16th of March 2016, in the debate on Stage 3 of the Land Reform Bill, now the Act, in which he said that he supported, and I quote him, greater openness and transparency to land ownership. And I reflect that a few days after Alex Ferguson's death, Colin Smith and I visited the Mull of Galloway. It was a beautiful day, and we went to the Mull of Galloway experience, climbing up the lighthouse with its magnificent views of Ireland, the Isle of Man, but also back over the Rins of Galloway. That land is now in community ownership, which has brought with it a new energy and a new purpose. And I couldn't help thinking the fact that it had transferred to community ownership from state ownership, it was formerly owned by the Northern Lighthouse Board, would no doubt have pleased Alex. He was a greatly respected member of this Parliament, demonstrated by the widespread support that he received when he put his name forward for the position of Presiding Officer, a position, as others have said, he did not covet, but took on out of a sense of public duty. In fact, when Holyrood magazine asked about why he wanted to become Presiding Officer, he replied, and I quote, "I didn't. I had gone into the election in 2007 defending a majority of 99 against a strong SNP challenge. Having taken myself off the list, I was just relieved to be returned to Parliament with a significantly increased majority. I had no thoughts of anything other than being the MSP for Galloway and Upper Nithsdale. So the role of Presiding Officer came and found me, not the other way around." And in that same interview, he noted that he didn't find it difficult to put to one side his party politics in taking up the role of Presiding Officer. In fact, he said that not attending party conferences was for me one of the bonuses of the role. Of all the Labour MSPs I've asked, past and present, they all say the same. He was good-humoured. He was a gentleman, decent. If you were under fire from the media, which occasionally happens, he would offer words of encouragement and support. If he thought that you had made a good speech, he would make a point of saying so. And he was described by one former MSP as collegiate. One told me that to some on the left of the Labour Party in those early days of the Parliament, the idea of joining a cross-party group founded by an old Etonian Tory was not an immediately obvious move to make. But as the new Parliament settled down, that cross-party approach gained in preeminence and remains a feature of this Parliament today. Since leaving Parliament in 2016, he kept himself busy, including being the president of the Scottish campaign for national parks. He was particularly excited to be involved in making Galloway Scotland's next national park. And, Presiding Officer, a Galloway National Park would be a fitting legacy to Alex Fergusson. His retirement was too short-lived. There was much more he wanted to do, much more that he could have done. But this was a life well lived. And so, on behalf of the whole Scottish Labour Party, I extend our deepest condolences to his wife Merrin, his 3 sons Ian, Dougal and Christopher and their families, his mother Oriole, his sister Henrietta, his brother John, and to them we say, thank you for sharing this gentle man with us.
Thank you. I now call on Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There have been a number of these occasions over the years when we gather together to discuss a motion of condolence for one of our members, one of our colleagues who we've lost. These are always sad moments, but I think they are also moments of warmth, and they certainly should be, because they recognise, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are all human beings. And Alex Fergusson was someone whose humanity and warmth were always evident in the way he did the job. Hostility, tribal point scoring, those were simply never his style. But there is also a particular meaning for us as we gather together to mark the death of a former presiding officer. And it is the first time that's happened. The role of presiding officer is a particular service to the whole of Parliament, and a service that I think was probably enhanced in Alex Ferguson's case because he hadn't craved the role. Every session of Parliament has been different. The beginnings of devolution and coalition, a rainbow Parliament, a minority government, a majority single-party government, and now a session dominated by constitutional change. And the challenges for the person in that chair, the challenges for the presiding officer, are different on every occasion. New dynamics, new expectations. But what's the same each time is the requirement for one of our number to set aside their political commitments and make that wider contribution to politics, that wider service to Parliament as a whole. Alex Fergusson faced those challenges in the first minority government session. And as a result, one of the most powerful memories I'll have of this place, one of the moments I'll never forget, is one that I suspect he never forgot either. As has already been remarked by others, perhaps the most dramatic moment handled by a presiding officer sitting in the chair you're in today, Presiding Officer. Because it might be that back in 2009, some had made the assumption that inter-party negotiations would all be stitched up in advance and the debates in the chamber were mere performance. But when the budget votes that year were tied, a perfect draw, and Alex Fergusson sitting there, where you are today, Presiding Officer, forced to place the casting vote to strike down the budget, I saw the colour drain several shades from his face, and a moment that I think neither of us will ever have forgotten. I want to thank him, therefore, for his service to Parliament, but more than anything, I want to hope for goodness that he forgave me for the palpitations that I caused him that day. And I give, on behalf of the Scottish Green Party, my deepest condolences to Alex Ferguson's family, friends and community.
Thank you. And I now call on Willie Rennie.
Alex Fergusson was a Conservative. Of that there is no doubt. He was also a One Nation Conservative, a caring Conservative, a Conservative who really believed in devolution. On these benches we saw Conservative as close to federalism as it was possible to be. We think he was ahead of his time. Alex was in 1999, like most new MSPs, new to frontline politics too. As David Mundell endearingly described at his memorial service, The press release was a new phenomenon for Alex, but he took well to political life. For him, the cheerful discussion about the news of politics, the travails of a government or the scrapes of a political friend were all part of what made him special. He was a servant to his constituents. In those earlier terms, first as a regional representative and then as a constituency MSP, he put rural issues on the front page. He was a voice for farmers at the height of that tragedy that was foot and mouth. Few in rural Scotland, especially in the south of the country, were not affected. He pressed the then Rural Affairs Minister, my colleague Ross Finney, on measures the government must take at the most difficult times. As presiding officer, he was a champion when farmers needed champions. As a presiding officer, he was an ambassador not just for this Parliament, but for Scotland too. Wherever Alex led overseas, Scotland benefited, with his immaculate manners, his personal skills, and his sense of humour. Perhaps his fondest visit was when he returned to New Zealand with a delegation, returning to a country where he once lived and worked. He stayed close to colleagues of all persuasions as presiding officer. He said that his time was all the richer for the deeper friendships that were built during that time. He was conscious in 2007 to 11 that the Parliament there was no majority. So all the more need to take the mood of members, good, bad or indifferent. Alex was a force of stability for the Parliament, at least at that time of great political instability. He ensured that even when the opposition did not like what had happened, they might do so with a little smile on their face. He loved cricket, and who would be better than a former presiding officer to umpire the MSPs versus Press cricket match? Like all good umpires and presiding officers, he wasn't above the observation of the quality of the MSP attack. When he retired as presiding officer, he won his seat again, the first time any presiding officer had done so. No mean achievement after 4 years of having to be impartial. In a world where too many take themselves all too seriously, a sense of humour is a notable asset. An ability to poke fun at each other, laugh at one's own misfortune and at one's party. Alex had won, and many of the reasons to mourn his passing. Above all else, is that what we will really miss. Our thoughts are with Alex's family. He was one of us, but much more than that, he was yours, and we were just lucky to know him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Before moving on to the next business, we'll just take a short pause. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. We'll turn to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 14180 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a revised business programme for today and Thursday. I would ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion to say so now. I call on Graham Day to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. No one asks to speak against the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 14180 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Thank you very much. We turn now to topical questions. Before I do, I just want to remind members, Presiding Officers and I have been discussing this matter with business managers and others. We're very conscious that we want to make sure we respect all members when they are asking questions, and we will try not to interrupt. However, it is imperative that all members try to get to the point of the question, try to do so succinctly, do not make an argument. You may make a sentence beforehand, but don't try to make an argument. And also, it would be beneficial if ministers could answer succinctly too, and we'll get through all the questions. And if we don't make progress, it'll be the members at the end of the statement, at the end of the queue for questions that get dropped, rather than us trying to cut people off. So, on that note, move on to topical questions. Question number 1, Mike Rumbles.
To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with ScotRail and Police Scotland regarding arrangements for the League Cup semi-finals.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
While the scheduling of matches is a matter for the football authorities, we recognise there is anger, particularly among supporters who are travelling from Aberdeen and Edinburgh. The Scottish Government, Transport Scotland and ScotRail were not consulted ahead of the SPFL announcement, though we have discussed this issue with all key organisations, including ScotRail and Police Scotland. We're actively engaging with all relevant partners to consider all key issues of concern. This dialogue will continue, and I hope the appropriate outcome will be reached.
Mike Rumbles.
Well, I thank the Minister for that response. It should be a fantastic opportunity for families across the country to get to these showpieces of Scottish football, but fans and the clubs involved say the planning has been botched. Families are thinking twice about going. They're concerned about the logistics of getting there and home again, with ScotRail saying the logistical challenges shouldn't be underestimated. And although we hope people will act responsibly, there is concern, real concern, about the risk of having 100,000 fans from 4 rival teams congregate in the same area on the same day. And overnight, the Scottish Police Federation have described this as idiotic. Does the Minister agree that the change is necessary and the date should be moved, at least?
Minister.
The member makes a number of very important points, many of which I think SPFL should have considered before making their decision. But I know that Police Scotland has significant expertise in successfully policing high-profile matches. Discussions are continuing, and I understand that Police Scotland has asked the SPFL to review its plans and has sought assurance around public safety. I know that will be a welcome move by many of the fans. Police Scotland will review further information and discuss any issues further with the SPL. It's vital that public order and safety remain paramount in any decision going forward. I would also ask the SPFL to make sure they are considering the fans and they are considering the interests of Scottish football in any final decision.
Mike Rumbles.
I mean, I don't recall ScotRail taking an event organiser to task so publicly before. It didn't hold back. The SPFL is well aware from previous events of the logistical challenges an early kick-off presents, particularly from Sunday morning services from Aberdeen, and North East fans, and particularly speaking about North East fans, have been given a thoroughly raw deal, as there isn't a train will get Aberdonians to Glasgow before the kick-off. And I'd like to thank the Aberdeen Evening Express for leading the campaign for a fair deal for fans. But does the Minister agree that event organisers have a responsibility to accommodate the needs of people from the whole of Scotland, not just in the Central Belt, and has the Minister considered what the Government can do to encourage this in the future?
Minister. I think, again, the member makes a very good point. As I said in my first answer, the SPFL did not have any dialogue with ScotRail prior to making the decision, and I have asked the SPFL to ensure that in future appropriate dialogue with all the appropriate agencies takes place before decisions of this nature are made.
Thank you. We seem to have a huge amount of interest in this subject. I don't think we'll get through, despite my appeal for brevity. I'm not sure we'll get through them all, but Lewis MacDonald to be followed by Gordon MacDonald.
Thank you very much. I was encouraged by the Minister's initial response to say that dialogue is continuing and that he hopes an appropriate outcome will be forthcoming. He also mentioned a review by Police Scotland. Can I ask the Minister if that dialogue includes a proposition from Government that the SPFL should actually scrap their existing plans to have 2 semi-finals at the same venue on the same day, revisit that and do something that serves the interests of football fans, not just in the North East but across Scotland?
Minister.
Ultimately, the decision of when fixtures take place has to be a matter for the SPFL, but they have to, I think, take into account advice from Police Scotland, advice from Transport Scotland and advice from ScotRail. They need to take account of the fans and they need to consider what is in the best interest of Scottish football.
Gordon MacDonald to be followed by Jamie Green. Gordon MacDonald.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I've written to the SPFL expressing what I believe to be a lack of consideration for families that are expected to leave Glasgow at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night to travel back to Edinburgh, and which could be worse if the game goes into extra time or penalties. Does the Minister share my concern for Hearts fans in my constituency who, given the 7:45 kick-off, will be lucky to get home by midnight?
Minister.
Mindful of the time, I am sure the SPFL will be listening to everything that's said in the Chamber today. The points that the member makes are well made.
Jamie Green to be followed by Maureen Ward.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My questions are less for the agency, more for the Minister. Can he confirm what discussions the Government has had with Transport Scotland and ScotRail to ensure that supply will meet demand on the day? And secondly, specifically, what discussions have been had between Police Scotland, BTP and the Government to ensure that there will be adequate police numbers and increased presence in the community to reassure any concerned residents or businesses?
Minister. As I said in my earlier answer, the Scottish Government is continuing to liaise and discuss with all key stakeholders.
Maureen Watt to be followed by Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's already been pointed out that the first train from Aberdeen to Glasgow on that Sunday arrives 14 minutes after the match has started. What levers has the Scottish Government, or can the Scottish Government use, to remind football in Scotland that they too have a role to play in reducing carbon emissions and car journeys, that they have a responsibility for the health and safety of their fans as well as their players, and that without fans there would be no clubs and no football TV deals that seem to drive everything? And can I ask those in this chamber who have not signed my motion to do so, and also to support the Evening Express campaign on this issue?
Minister.
Again, I think the member makes her points well, which I am sure the SPFL will be listening to.
Jeremy Balfour to be followed by James Kelly.
Thank you, President Officer. I was hoping to take my 2 girls to watch Hearts go into the final, but with the change in time, that will be impossible due to their age. Would the Minister agree with me that if we are trying to attract younger people to come and watch football and take part in football, this is a retrograde step and the SFA should rethink the situation and move one game to a more appropriate time?
Minister.
Again, in order to make sure everyone can contribute, I think the member is making some very good points, which I am hopeful that the SPFL will be listening to.
James Kelly to be followed by Gordon Lyndhurst.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This decision by the SPFL, taken in secret behind closed doors, treats supporters and the general public with contempt. There's a simple solution: move one of the games to either the Monday evening or the following weekend. Will Government use their officers to produce a coordinated response behind an alternative date? And urge the SPFL to reverse this disastrous decision?
Minister.
As I said earlier, Government are continuing to engage with stakeholders, but I think of what I've already said, the Police Scotland's have specifically asked the SPFL to review its plans, and they've asked for assurances around public safety, and it will be then for Police Scotland to review that further information and to discuss how to take that forward in the best interests of public safety. That obviously has to be the primary focus of Police Scotland, but I will go back to my point that I think the SPFL has a responsibility to their fans, a point that many folk in the Chamber have made, and also they have a responsibility to Scottish football.
Gordon Lyndhurst to be followed finally by James Dornan.
Bearing in mind that this fixture is set for Halloween weekend, which is unfortunately one of the busiest weekends of the year for the emergency services, and that this will mean that police and other essential services will hardly get any time off, does the Minister agree that efforts should be made to see that all those that can get at least one day a week off from their work, and in particular, where possible, those of essential services?
Minister.
I think that's a point that I will make sure that the Cabinet Secretary for Justice is aware of.
And James Dornan.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Given we hear that the SPFL didn't even think to contact ScotRail, have any discussions with bus operators, that the SPF are strongly opposed to the two games going ahead on the same day, does the Minister agree with me that such disregard of football fans or public services and my constituents further highlights the need to improve the governance of Scottish football? And would the Scottish Government give some thought to how this could be achieved?
Minister.
The member's passion for football and the need to improve governance of our national game is well recorded. Following my recent appointment, I have now formally met with the Scottish FA Chief Executive Ian Maxwell and SPFL Chief Executive Neil Doncaster to discuss issues like these. Governance can be strengthened and the voice of the supporter can be heard more loudly.
Can I thank the Minister and members for following up on my remarks? I didn't expect to have such success so early on. However, I'm very pleased. We're going to move on shortly to the next item of business, which will be a motion on Motion 14160 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville. We'll just take a few seconds for members to change seats.
The next item of business is debate on motion 14160 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on building a social security system together, co-designing the social security charter. May I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Shirley Ann Somerville to speak to and move the motion for up to 12 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last week I stood before the Chamber and outlined the great progress that has been made since the passage of the 2016 Scotland Act, including plans to reform disability assessments, successfully making Social Security Scotland's first payments, and being in a position to deliver Best Start grants by Christmas, more than 6 months ahead of schedule. And today, following the publication of our interim findings, I will set out in more detail our work to develop the Social Security Charter, yet another example of how hard we are pushing to create a better system for the people of Scotland. Any discussion of the Charter should begin with the principles it must reflect, principles which establish human rights, tackling poverty, respect and dignity as the cornerstone on which our new system will be built. I believe that the spirit of cooperation that led us to those statements of ambition set out in the Social Security Scotland Act rank among the finest achievements of this Parliament. It speaks to our capacity to look past political difference, to work together on our most fundamental shared goal, to make things better for the people that we serve. There are members on all sides of the Chamber who deserve credit for their role in that work. Adam Tompkins and Jeremy Balfour clarified its legal status. Alison Johnson and George Adam helped shape the principles. Mark Griffin strengthened the consultation requirements, and thanks to Pauline McNeill, the Charter requires parliamentary approval, a democratic seal that ensures that our founding ideals for this public service can never be forgotten. But they will recognise, as I do, that the work of this Government and this Parliament is also shaped by our responsibility to carry those ideals from the statute book into the everyday delivery of services in a way that will be meaningful in improving people's experience. And that is the purpose of the Social Security Charter. The Charter will reflect the principles of our new social security system. It will explain in clear, concise terms what people are entitled to and what they can expect from the new system. It will describe some of the specific actions that the system will take to ensure that those expectations are realised in practice. During the bill process, the message from stakeholders and committee members was clear, that the people of Scotland should be at the heart of the Charter's design. So we have worked to give faithful effect to that remit. The process we have developed, with the guidance and broad support of stakeholders, builds on the strength of our existing engagement, and it substantially exceeds the consultation requirements set out in the Act. We have recruited a core group of 30 people from our experience panels to oversee the Charter's development. This includes everything from decisions on the Charter structure and appearance, the language it should contain, right through to the real substance of what the principles should mean in practice and the kind of policy commitments that would get us there. This work will be bolstered by individual interviews with people unable to travel to a central location and through a survey of all experienced panel members, ensuring that our engagement goes both deep and wide. This is an exemplar of a human rights approach in action. There are few, if any, parallel examples of governments empowering citizens to jointly lead policy work of this prominence. To get this right, we also need the support and the expert advice of Civic Scotland, and that is why we have of governments empowering citizens to jointly lead policy work of this prominence. To get this right, we also need the support and the expert advice of Civic Scotland, and that is why we have established a stakeholder group composed of 27 organisations and chaired by Dr Sally Witcher to provide feedback and advice. Working with stakeholders, we have Gypsy travellers and women who have experienced particular hardship and barriers. And since we have designed a model in which a core group of citizens are empowered to share decision-making, we think it's imperative that the perspectives of young people and those from black and minority ethnic communities are represented on it too. That's why I'm pleased to announce that due to this work, we have added representation from BME communities, young people and the wider range of LGBT people to the core group. Presiding Officer, having explained the process, I will now turn to the interim findings that we published last week. I had the pleasure of meeting the core group in Dundee on the 23rd of August. They shared with me very powerful experiences of adversity, stigmatisation and suffering at the hands of the UK system, and I would like to thank them for the time that they spent with me that day and telling their stories. Stories that sadly will be all too familiar to many of us who have heard them in our constituency offices the length and breadth of Scotland. As one group member put it, for years I've had to fight them every step of the way. It's like being Harry Potter, trying to find the Philosopher's Stone, but in this story, you're the villain and not the hero. But they are not there to dwell on the failings of the past. They're there to build a better future for their fellow citizens, and the group's thinking speaks to that optimism and that creativity. They want staff who are patient and kind, who see them not as numbers on a screen, but as individual people who understand their circumstances and what that might feel like. This reflects a wider movement in Scottish public services, and it is right that this new system should be a standard bearer for this kind of approach. The group sees this being achieved by involving people with lived experience in staff training, a powerful proposal that I intend to progress. They want a system that's also on their side, not against them, filled with people knowledgeable about social security and related services, and people who use that knowledge not to catch them out, but to simplify processes, maximise incomes and to direct them towards services that can help tackle poverty and improve their well-being. To achieve this, they have spoken about the necessity of recruiting staff who are well-trained, well-led and who share the values embodied by the principles. Because a staff member who cares, who is happy and who is equipped with the necessary skills is always more likely to deliver a better service. They are also clear about their status as people accessing a public service. They want to be active partners, to understand decisions, the reasons for them, and how to challenge them if they disagree. They emphasise a culture of learning and improvement, where feedback is valued, mistakes are acknowledged, and processes are in place to ensure that things are done better in the future. And they reaffirm what most of us here already know, that the shameful regime of disability assessments requires root and branch reform. The scope of their ideas extends beyond the operational to the systemic. They speak to the need to end stigma and to the restoration of social security as a public good, a service there for all of us should we need it, and that's a source of national pride because of it. This reflects the principle that social security is an investment in our people and in our country. That, of course, was the original intention of the Beveridge report. Many of us here today will agree that we seem to have lost something precious along the way. The group's proposed solution is for government to lead work to publicly challenge stigma and the false, divisive and exceptionally hurtful political rhetoric that causes it. And I can confirm that we are committed to giving careful thought to how all of these proposals can be delivered. Presiding Officer, the picture that emerges from these findings is of the potential for a charter that is rich in ambition, a charter that truly fulfils that human right aspect to social security held so dear in the passage of the Social Security Act. And it underscores once again that how we administrate social security is not just a matter of policy detail. It's a moral issue. It speaks to the character of our country and the type of country that we want to live in. Our principles and how we give effect to them matter to people's lives. Reflecting on my early weeks in this role, and of all the people that I have spoken to during that time, the word that I keep coming back to, keep returning to, is trust. It is clear that one of our shared successes is that through the Act, through the principles, through the Charter, through the introduction of new forms of assistance and the commitment to reform assessments, the people of Scotland are beginning to put their faith in us that this new system will really be different for them. I believe that this trust is the single most precious commodity that an elected government and indeed a parliament can have with the people they serve. It is hard won, but it is so easily lost. So I wish to place on record my personal commitment to honouring that trust with action, showing through the evidence of what we do that this government means what it says, and there is of course a role for Parliament in that too. It is clear that the Charter is something that we all believe in, and it is my sincere hope that we can continue in this spirit of collaboration to support the work of the people who know the system best and to whom it ultimately belongs, the people of Scotland. Presiding Officer, can I close by moving the motion in my name and thanking everyone, particularly our core group of experienced panels who have helped so much so far in delivering our interim findings, and I look forward to their further work in delivering a charter that this Parliament and this country can be proud of. Thank you.
I now call on Jeremy Balfour to speak to and move Amendment 14160.1. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I move the amendment in my name? Can I welcome the debate this afternoon, and can I welcome the journey that the Government and Parliament has been on over the last 2 years in regard to social security? I suppose the fundamental question is, why have a charter? And for me, the reason to have a charter is to improve the experience of those using the social security system. We want everybody who will come in contact with the new Scottish agency to have a positive experience, even if you do not get what they want ultimately out of it. And this is what we as a Parliament, and I would suggest the Scottish Government, we need to strive in for. So what is the role of the Charter? Well, the danger is, and I think the danger the committee recognised early on, is that it would simply be a bunch of words on a notice board that would be ignored by everybody else. And I think part of the journey that the committee and Scottish Government have been on is to show that the Charter has to be far more than that. It cannot simply be words, even simple words, on a board. It has to be something that people understand and can respect and act upon. It's there for staff to understand what their responsibility is to claimants. It's there for claimants to be able to understand what they should expect of the new agency. It's there for third parties, including this Parliament, to hold that agency to account. However, it is important to stress that the Charter does not give individual rights to claimants. What it is there is that the agency can be there to be held accountable by Scottish Government and by this Parliament, and we have to make sure that the balance between individual rights and community rights are held sometimes in tension. So I think it is important that stakeholders, individuals, third parties and this Parliament get an early view of the Charter. And it would be interesting to know whether the Government have a time yet when the Charter will be available for open scrutiny. Again, steps have been taken towards that, but we need a full account of it. We need to know how the Charter is being drawn up, who is involved in the process. I welcome the statement by the Cabinet Secretary this afternoon in regard to the expansion of those who are on the important experiential panel. Because I know some groups and some people have contacted me in regard to concern that perhaps it didn't represent the whole of Scottish society. But I think it would be interesting to know also how are these experiential panels working in practice. Is it co-designing the system, co-designing the document, or is it Scottish Government going with a piece of paper and saying, like it or leave it? How open are we to changes within the Social Charter and in regard to comments around it? Because we have to make sure that there is gender balance, there's ethnic minority representation again, and I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's remarks earlier. Perhaps most importantly, we also need to have disabled people represented on this group. Now that may seem very obvious, and no doubt the Cabinet Secretary wants to jump up and say we already have that. But what our amendment seeks to do this afternoon is seek to expand on those groups that government are consulting with. Perhaps groups who are seldom held from. Perhaps not the obvious suspects that we all go to on a regular basis. Perhaps those who have disabilities which fall into a minority group within disability, which again aren't often heard. Or can I say gently to the Government, also to hear from people who have had a positive experience from DWP already. The danger is that we, and MSPs are in danger of this, people only come to us if they have a negative experience. And there are people, I would include myself, who have had a positive experience in regard to the interaction. And we do not want to lose that voice in our engagement either. We have to make sure that both seen and unseen disability is included in any panel and in any drawing up of the Social Charter. But ultimately, we must keep the goal of having the Social Security Act fully implemented, up and running, before this Parliament comes to an end in 2021. As one ancient philosopher said, even the journey has to end. And there is a slight danger in that we keep going over and over and over things, and we don't actually get to the goal of being able to deliver the social security system that we all want. So will the Cabinet Secretary, in her summing up, confirm again that every benefit that has been devolved will be delivered up and running by 2021? Will she confirm that they will be run by the new agency and that people will know how it all works? I hope also that we as a Parliament will have time to consider fully the regulations as they come forward. I welcome again so far the Government's openness in regard to that, and looking forward to the Cabinet Secretary being with committee on Thursday morning. But undoubtedly the most complicated, the most difficult regulations are going to be around PIP, DLA and attendance allowance. And I wonder, in conclusion, can the Cabinet Secretary tell this Parliament when the draft regulations around those benefits will be released? We welcome this debate as a party. We welcome the Social Charter. But we will hold this Government to account that it is not simply words, but it is actions that we deliver. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
I now call on Mark Griffin to speak to and move Amendment 1416.2. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the comments made by the Cabinet Secretary, but primarily I want to thank everyone involved in the experience panels so far. I think you and your almost 2,500 colleagues have a big task in ensuring that dignity, fairness and respect come to life in our new social security system. We will support the Government motion today and are pleased that the Charter is becoming a reality, involving Scotland's people in its design, just like last week's restatement of the commitment to ban the private sector from assessments is a critical step in delivering the law this Parliament agreed to in the spring. The co-design is going to be hugely valuable to the social security system, and I think, put simply, it's about working with people on social security, not simply dictating a system to them. Presiding Officer, we've seen the horrors that a Tory overhaul of disability benefits has led to. The disabled Scots will lose £190 million through PIP. Hundreds of thousands are only gaining entitlement through court rulings instead of a fair process. And since the last Holyrood elections, 50,000 people have already had to suffer a second PIP assessment under the revolving door of reviews. We all know that needs to change, but it's for those who use social security to say what they want to change. And when the Charter is approved this November, almost 18 months since the experience panels were first launched, members will then be able to point to the tangible difference that underlines our new human rights-based system. And as well as celebrating the role that the people of Scotland will have in the new system, and this debate serves as a reminder of the improvements the third sector and their members and their service users secured in the Act. Through their campaigning, they secured rights to advocacy, to accessible information and to get hold of assessment reports. And these are hard-won improvements which make this more their system, built with them, not for them. As the Cabinet Secretary said earlier, Parliament will give final approval to the Charter. That was an amendment pursued by the third sector and lodged by my colleague Pauline McNeill. But for me, two changes stand out. First, it's because of the Give Me 5 campaign that child benefit recipients must be consulted on the Charter. And secondly, I worked with Engender, Clare and Scottish Women's Aid to ensure Government consults with organisations who work with those at risk of poverty because of their protected characteristic. The scale of ambition behind the experience panels is commendable, and we will support the Government's motion today. As our amendment says, when done well, it should be an exemplar that informs how public services are reformed in the future. Friday's report, however, identifies quite clearly what I had become aware of over the summer that not a single BME person was directly recruited to work on the core group. The Cabinet Secretary has mentioned that again today, that a focus group of BAME individuals has been set up, but the fact that this has just taken place has to be of a concern. We know BAME individuals are less likely to access their entitlements and face barriers during the assessment process. So when hard-to-reach groups are being asked for their involvement, their participation at the last minute, we then all lose out. They miss their initial chance to have a say, while local organisations are stretched to get people in place quickly. And then government, of course, lacks the group's views from the very start, undermining its own commitment to equality and the work that it has done so far. And as a result, sometimes things get missed. Page 14 of Friday's report says stakeholders added some meanings to the list described above that the core group hadn't mentioned, for example, around the importance of equality and non-discrimination. And that's good that those have been added, but it just highlights what we can miss if we're not all-encompassing and making sure we're covering everyone who's been disadvantaged by the current system. And before I conclude, as our amendment states, the panels are an open, ongoing process in which people who are entitled to social security are encouraged to enrol and participate. The Cabinet Secretary spoke about the 300 people who responded to that recruitment exercise, but none of those were BAME, and we do have to ask ourselves why and how underrepresented they are in the experienced panels. The Cabinet Secretary told me that a report on protected characteristics will be published in November, and I would encourage her to publish the details before recess. And with all members being surveyed on the Charter this autumn, I hope the Cabinet Secretary would agree further members should be recruited before that survey goes out so that we get their views. And welcoming new recruits to the panels, along with more open, publicly available means of consultation, I think would be of great value to the process, and it might help overcome some of the representation issues I've referenced today. But when the time comes to consider its replacement for PIP and carers allowance, the rules, criteria and rates of benefits, once again the people of Scotland will have their chance to deliver a social security system founded on dignity, fairness and respect. The Presiding Officer, I move the amendment in my name. Thank you.
I call Patrick Harvey for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There are, of course, a great many things deeply wrong with the UK's current social security system. The real terms value of many benefits has been allowed to fall over time, no longer allowing people to meet a basic minimum standard of living, even to the extent that people can't feed themselves. Just last week, the Scottish Health Survey revealed that 4% of those people surveyed ran out of food in the last year. The system of benefit sanctions leaves people destitute. And with the benefit cap, the UK government says to claimants they need a certain level of benefit, but then pays them much less on an entirely arbitrary basis, sometimes to the tune of £2,500 less. As a result, as the motion notes, trust and faith in the social security system has broken down. How did we get here? In part, it's because so many welfare reforms have been drawn up by a small group of policymakers working toward a narrow, cost-saving agenda. It's based on crude caricatures of the social security system itself and its users, with no conception of what it's like, for instance, to be raising a child on a small, fluctuating income. All that experience is out there to be used to make better policy, but the DWP has rarely taken much interest in it. From the ongoing farce that is universal credit, to the brutality of denying personal independence payment to tens of thousands of people, almost all the major problems of current welfare reforms could have been foreseen, just not by the UK government. It was warned by multiple welfare rights organisations about the impact on rent arrears of having such long universal credit waiting periods. Disabled people's group said that the PIP criteria didn't reflect the reality of living with certain types of disabilities and health conditions, and that many people would lose out. All of these warnings have, unfortunately, proved all too prescient. And that's why the approach the Scottish Government is taking, set out in the motion, is timely and welcome. It's important that we capture the lived experience of applying for and receiving, or sometimes not receiving, social security. In relation to disability benefits, there is the stress of going to a PIP assessment, sometimes huge distances from a claimant's home, the invasiveness of some of the questions that are asked at these assessments, and the bewildering complexity of the process. All of these are too often the experience of people when they ask for support to help them with the extra costs arising from their disability or from health conditions. Their experiences should be brought to bear on how our new devolved social security system operates. And that, I'm pleased to say, is already happening. The experience panels have drawn more attention to the often highly stressful and sometimes damaging experience of just having to go to an assessment. One panel member said, "The face-to-face assessment for PIP was honestly one of the most traumatic experiences of my adult life." And the report from the About My Benefits and Me survey reported that assessments should only be carried out where necessary, and the evidence provided by medical professionals should be enough. Now, that was the basis for a Green amendment, and I'm pleased to say that was supported unanimously by Parliament, that introduced a ban on face-to-face assessments if the evidence can be found through other means. Another Green amendment, based on what PIP claimants have said in the experience panels and elsewhere, ensures that the distance the person has to travel for any assessment that does prove necessary, that distance will be taken into account. So I was encouraged to hear all of this being outlined by the Cabinet Secretary last week in the statement on disability assessments. The proposals on conducting only absolutely necessary face-to-face assessments, audio recording for assessments to rebuild trust, giving people flexibility in choosing their assessment appointment, all of these aspects were set out. And what was outlined there, if it is implemented to its fullest extent, and that of course remains to be seen, but if it is, it could be a significant change to the disability benefits system and to people's experience of it. I'm pleased that my colleague Alison Johnson has played a constructive role in putting some of these measures into law, but ultimately these improvements are the work of the thousands of people, individual claimants, who have spoken out about their treatment, their experience, and I'm glad that their voices are now being heard. I think we also need to think through, Presiding Officer, some of the implications of what the motion says about how the system will be established. As I've noted, the lived experience of people has been used well to shape the founding legislation. But that was the easy bit. None of the major benefits have yet been established. And as that work proceeds, the people and the organisations that the Scottish Government are co-designing the system with will continue to call for changes that won't be cheap or easy. They'll continue to call for benefit top-ups to reverse the benefit cap and the ongoing freeze on the value of payments. Those with experience of PIP will likely ask for a reversal of the staggering cuts to that benefit, and undervalued carers, especially those, for example, who care for more than one person, may well ask for that extra care to be recognised through carers' allowance. And the response at that point cannot simply be that those requests are unrealistic. As well as being untrue, because we paid benefits of an adequate rate before and can do again, this would not be in keeping with a truly co-designed system. Closing, Presiding Officer, I'm glad that we're moving away from the problematic phrase of welfare and reclaiming the language of social security. The system should indeed be social. It's a sign and signal of our duty, compassion and respect for one another. And that's why, as the motion rightly says, we need to build it together. Greens will support the motion tonight and both the amendments.
Alex Cole. Oh, sorry, I seem to have been cut off somehow. Alex Cole-Hamilton, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Liberal Democrats absolutely welcome today's debate, as they do also this next frontier in an agenda which has been driven by consensus by this Scottish Government. The Cabinet Secretary referred at the top of her remarks to principles, and principles really fundamentally matter. I'm also gratified she referenced in the same breath William Beveridge, and I often lean into quotes from Beveridge when we discuss social security in this Parliament, because I think Presiding Officer Patrick Harvey is right. Social security is far better an aspiration than the welfare state, because he said in establishing a national minimum, the state should leave room and encouragement for voluntary action by each individual to provide more than the minimum for themselves and their family. And I absolutely agree with that. That quote is one of the many reasons I am a Liberal. It's about social mobility, it's about dignity. But I think it's fair to say, Presiding Officer, that in establishing that national minimum at a UK level, we have come significantly adrift of that. So I very much welcome our opportunity here as a Parliament to create a Scottish social security system, and I am gratified that it is to be underpinned by this charter, because who better to define the terms and parameters of this system than those who have lived under the failures of systems previous. A charter, for me, just in its nomenclature, defines itself as being rights-based. It's about giving people ownership and understanding of what to expect and what they can rely upon in terms of their rights, and what action they can take should their rights be infringed. And that lived experience is already shaping this new system, as we heard in the statement last week, in the conduct of disability assessments. I think every single member in this chamber will know a constituent who has been subject to the assessments of the past and who has suffered, as a result, the indignity of those assessments of the past. So I certainly welcome the flexibility that has been created, and in the comfort that can be extended to claimants in the recording of the assessment process, so that they can lean on that should they have grounds for appeal, and indeed in the reality that some people will rightly be removed from the need for face-to-face assessments going forward altogether. So we, as Lib Dems, wholeheartedly support, as we did last week, the fundamental workings of the new structures being built, and indeed the fact that they are underpinned by this panel, or these panels. I think it's really important, though, in the conduct of these panels, that we work with the stakeholders to identify the unintended consequences that can come from that. The flexibility conundrum is important here, and I think it's absolutely vital that we do all of the things that the Cabinet Secretary outlined in her statement last week to make the assessments less intrusive, easier, and built around the terms and needs of the individuals that they are seek to serve. But with that, there is a probability of time delays unless we significantly increase headcounts of the people who are commissioned to conduct those assessments. I'm not saying we shouldn't be flexible, but we should be alive to those concerns, and I would be grateful to the Cabinet Secretary if she can try to address those in her remarks at the close of today's debate. I think this, for me, is about not over-promising and then under-delivering, because I think with the greatest will in the world, there is many examples of public policies which were established around the principles similar to those that we seek to foster in the Charter, but then sadly let those individuals they seek to serve down. So I think that we can all agree on the tenets that we hope will come forth in the conduct of this Charter. I hope very much that the Cabinet Secretary and her government are reflecting on the views of those stakeholder organisations who are seeking to influence the process, that there is a great deal of expertise there, not least with the individuals that have lived experience of going through the systems that went before it, but who lean into those organisations that provide advocacy and who gather information and research to make to the betterment of this project that lies ahead of it. For me and for the Lib Dems, this can be distilled down into three basic areas of principle, that we do foster that safety net from cradle to grave that Beveridge first envisioned, which allows people to be both socially mobile but protected at times of crisis and of need, not driven by monetary considerations alone. I think in times of austerity, that is often all too easy for governments of all hues to look at the bottom line first and foremost and design a welfare state or a social security system around that. But most importantly, Deputy Presiding Officer, this has to be about the management of expectations, that people have faith and confidence in a system that does not put artificial barriers in their way to the assistance that they need and they deserve, but it seems to be fair that they have access to information that is swift and reliable and accessible, and that they have confidence that should a decision be turned against them, that they know the route that they can take to have that decision overturned, and the confidence that they shall receive fair hearing to that end. I think if we can work with those stakeholders to foster a charter which captures those three fundamental principles, then I believe that this Parliament and this Scottish Government will have gone some way to have answered the challenge that Beveridge set in his earliest vision. And with that, Presiding Officer, I offer the Government support of these benches for the motions tonight, the amendments from the opposition parties, and I welcome this consensus that we continue to move forward together in. Thank you.
We now move to the open debate. Speeches of up to 6 minutes, please. Bob Doris, followed by Jamie Halcrow-Johnson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm currently convener of the Social Security Committee in the Scottish Parliament. I succeeded Claire Adamson, MSP, in that role, and I pay tribute to her work as convener and to the work of the committee, where there were a number of changes in recent weeks. Yesterday, our committee visited Dundee. We visited both the DWP's Job Centre Plus and Scotland's new Social Security Agency whilst there, both important meetings. However, our most important visits were meeting those with lived experience of the benefit system and volunteers who offered their support to them. Some of the stories we heard were quite disturbing in terms of how the UK benefit system handles claims. Unfortunately, it only served to cement much of the experiences I have heard about in my own constituency casework from those who need to interact with the UK social security system and in particular with universal credit. I want to highlight a few of the issues within the UK system by way of contrast with what we are seeking to do here in Scotland, because at the heart of this debate is how we can get the Scottish system right at the first time of asking. Get it right by listening to those who have lived experience of social security, the system, and where possible to have them co-producing that system. However, in relation to the UK system and the rollout of universal credit, I genuinely don't believe anyone with lived experience of the system would support a system that forces claimants to wait at least 5 weeks under universal credit to get recourse to public funds and instead relying on DWP loans. This is causing real hardship, pain and indebtedness. No one with lived experience would require a family to have to reapply for housing benefit element of universal credit to go direct to the landlord simply because they'd moved house. This has caused constituents of mine rent arrears to accrue and threaten tenancies. No one with lived experience would put at risk child tax credits to working families under universal credit by potentially putting conditionality onto workers that being code for possible sanctions if they can't secure a wage rise, a different job or an increase in their hours of work. That's what may happen when Job Centre Plus move away from what is currently being called a light touch system. I just don't believe these things and many others would have happened had the lived experience of those who interact with the UK system been truly listened to at the time when the new UK system was being designed. Now we're left with a situation we're trying to retrofit and fix some of those weaknesses. I hope to do that constructively with our partners in the UK Government and everyone else to do that, because we have to do it. By developing Scotland's social security system with that lived experience, we are doing all we can to build the key principles of fairness, dignity and respect. Crucially, by looking at co-design of the Scottish system in partnership with those of lived experience of the social security system, we hope to avoid the issues that has beset the UK system. It is in that context that I warmly welcome the progress made in developing the Social Security Charter so far in conjunction with experienced panels. The Social Security Scotland Act 2018 quite rightly requires the first group of people to be consulted on the charter, those with physical or mental conditions that have experience of benefits that are being devolved. And I very much welcome the format that consultation is taking what I would consider as a layered approach. So yes, a core group of volunteers for in-depth work, individual sessions with people or groups who do not wish to be part of that group or are unable to join that core group, but also a survey of the wealth of experience we have with the 2,400 people registered with the Social Security Experience Panel. So that kind of layered, nuanced approach, I think, is the right way to take this forward. I also welcome the firm commitment within the Social Security Charter and indeed the system itself that sees Social Security entrenched within a human rights-based approach to treating claimants or clients. The system where people have a right to financial support in times of need and are not receiving a handout. I believe if we get this right, the terminology such as handout will be confined to the dustbin of history for good, because that's the right thing to do. The Social Security Charter is vital, therefore, as it will draw together what we as a society wish our social security system to deliver for clients, for staff, for society. Due to time constraints, I won't say as much about that as I would like to, but there's a bit in the recent document, the update from the Scottish Government in relation to the preparation for the Charter, that talks about culture. And culture is incredibly important in relation to designing this system. And when our committee visited the new Social Security Agency in Dundee, I got some really strong reassurances. We met the Chief Executive, David Wallace, and a number of other staff there. Even in their organisation, they're trying to embed that positive attitude. So in recruitment, they currently have about 90 staff. It will go up to 750 staff. The sifting process for interviews, anyone who didn't make that initial cut were given detailed feedback on why they didn't make that initial cut and offered support should they wish to reapply when other jobs came online. Those who tried to apply online for a job application with them but didn't actually complete the form, they were identified also. And they were written to and said, we noticed you showed an interest in applying for these jobs. You didn't complete the form. Was there a barrier there that we could work with you in relation to doing more in relation to that? So culture is everything. And a final bit of the culture that the new Social Security Agency is trying to do. We saw a whole series of post-it notes up on the wall in relation to the new carer supplement that they are now delivering. And they were really positive. I'll just give two of them. One person told an advisor he had answer when they found out the supplement. A second person said, whoopie do, we won't always get it right, but right at the start of this process, we are getting it right by listening to people with lived experience of the social security system.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. There have already been some positive contributions from around the Chamber today and good discussion about the feedback from the first steps of the co-design process. However, I'd like to reflect not simply on the intentions of the Charter, but what can be done to make it useful. The Scottish Government noted last year that a Charter was a popular idea. The same was true when John Major introduced his Citizen Charter initiative back in the 1990s. The risk with such documents is the potential to slip simply into the aspirational, bearing little relation to the services that are actually being delivered. In its position paper in September 2017, the Government pointed to one of the main proposed areas where a Charter could have value is in translating the core principles from high-level statements into commitments to deliver specific, measurable outcomes, establishing a strong link between the principles and the way that a system actually performs. Ministers will not find a great deal of dispute there, but we are left with a considerable number of commitments and expectations that ministers have crafted. It would be very useful to know both the detail of how they will be measured and the Scottish Government's approach. To give an example, in her statement and in the answer to questions last week, the Cabinet Secretary pledged action on geographical inequalities, on the outcome of assessments, on reducing assessment waiting periods, on reducing the appeals caseload, on reducing staff turnover amongst assessors, and pledged a presumably significant reduction in face-to-face assessments. But as this Parliament will expect to see these promises matched with action, the action must equally be met with measurable quantitative data. To refer back to the policy paper produced by the Scottish Government last year, it said, the Scottish Government has noted the concern that it may be difficult to demonstrate progress against relatively subjective concepts such as dignity and respect. The Scottish Government is therefore thinking carefully about how it might employ techniques of a more qualitative nature, such as survey data, feedback from individuals, focus groups, or an ongoing role for experience panels. As I previously touched on, the Scottish Government's approach to this will be all-important. With high political expectations, I hope that the temptation to fudge the measures of their performance will be avoided by ministers. If they intend to carry the Scottish Parliament with their proposals, it must be matched with candid assessment of the execution of their new powers and where they have fallen short of expectations. To refer again to the Cabinet Secretary's statement last week, she mentioned the regular independent reviews that have taken place at UK level of PIP assessment programmes. While she characterised this as simply tinkering around the edges by the DWP, I believe that both the PIP and ESA and independent assessments have been a valuable tool for improvement. With that in mind, I would be interested to know what analysis ministers have made of these independent assessments and how the lessons from this process could be reflected in measuring objectives against the standards that are to be included in this Charter. Will they subject themselves to the same level of scrutiny that the DWP has in the past? Now, as my party's spokesman for jobs and employability, I'd also like to reflect on one particular element which should be central to a number of the principles set out in the Social Security Act. That will be the ability to transition people who are out of work into meaningful employment and to overcome the barriers that they face. A key power to influence this is the devolution of the employability services. Again, measurable data will be important, as will lessons from different providers in different parts of the country, creating a transparent process by which they can share best practice. I would also quickly say that there is perhaps some contradiction between the Cabinet Secretary's language last week against outsourced providers for assessments being driven by profit alone and the use of such providers to support people into work. And I'll gently suggest that these organisations are either valued partners or they are not, and to consider the messages that are being sent by the words we use in this chamber. The objectives of dignity and fairness in the social security system certainly extend to providing a service to individual claimants and value to the taxpayer, both points enshrined in the Act. One element of fairness that I would mention, however, is the consistency of approach. The Cabinet Secretary has criticised the rigid inflexibility in assessment procedures. However, basing entitlement on consistent and objective criteria is critical to ensuring that any system is fair. Personalised assessment and objective assessment are not contradictory. In closing, I would also like to refer back a little to the issue about geographical inequality. As a representative of the Highlands and Islands, my region contains many of Scotland's remote, rural and island communities. There are a number of challenges for a social security system to operate as effectively in these areas as it does elsewhere, while also making sure that it takes into account the needs of individuals in these areas. The Cabinet Secretary said that no matter where people live, Scotland's social security system must deliver and must give people access to the same quality of service. I would like to see that included on the face of the Social Security Charter, and for the Scottish Government to consider how the Charter will be impacted by the principles of the Islands Act. It will also be important that the information is available at a suitably localised level for us to see where inequalities of access or outcome exist, and for action to be taken to address them. Presiding Officer, there is still a considerable body of work to be taken forward in these areas. I do, however, welcome the work taken on co-design of the Charter, as well as the wider work being taken forward by ministers and the Scottish Parliament's Social Security Committee. I'll finish by saying I cannot overestimate the importance of getting it right in this transitional period and laying the foundations for a system of support that works for everyone.
Claire Adamson, followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think most of us in the Chamber were here this afternoon when the Reverend D. MacDonald was speaking to us about vision, and on a very reflective afternoon I was reflecting on how vision affected our debate this afternoon, and I think it kind of sums up where we are now with the Social Security Act and how we are taking forward some of the proposals in that. It was a visionary of the Government to approach the Social Security Bill in the way that it did. It was visionary of the committee to have conducted the deliberations and the scrutiny of that bill in the way it did, and it was a privilege for me to convene that committee following on from the groundwork of Sandra White, and I want to thank all the members of that committee for their contribution in improving and securing a bill that I think that we're all very rightly proud of. No more so than the Minister Jean Freeman. On the day that we passed that, it was evident from across the Chamber that something different had been done in approaching this new social security system for Scotland. And it was something that I think that we should all take forward. There wasn't one of us that day that thought the job was done. We knew the majority of the work for the Social Security Act was still to come, and the majority of the work was still to be done, and there was much to do going ahead. And the Cabinet Secretary mentioned trust in her speech earlier on, and to my mind, the measurement of how successful this will have been or not is whether the trust of our citizens is restored in a social security system in Scotland. Much has been said about the experience panels, and I think this has been such an important part of the development of this bill. The experience panels have provided opportunities for information. They've been very, very successful in informing the committee and the government and the process of what's happening. I was delighted to hear from the Cabinet Secretary that they are further surveying the experience panels as the Charter is developed to ensure that it is indeed a genuine co-production that comes forward. And it's the whole vision of the Social Security Charter itself, which is absolutely unique to what we have. And as I said, and thanks to the work of Polly McNeill, this will be something that will be scrutinised by the Parliament itself, ensuring that the principles, the rights of our citizens are respected and that we get this right in Scotland. And much has been said also about the human rights approach, and I think this is so important to what we have going forward. I think the Cabinet Secretary said it was unparalleled to have a human rights-based approach to a bit of legislation and to a social security system in the one we have. And I think it reflects the vision of the government going forward. And indeed, in the programme for government, they also said they would enshrine children's rights and incorporate the principles of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child into our laws in Scotland. And I think that vision for the society we want, for how we want Scotland to view human rights, both of our adult and child populations, is very, very important and speaks to the vision of what we have before us. It's also about empowering our citizens. And this is so very important because so many times we hear stories of people who feel disengaged from society, disengaged from the whole process of what they've had to go through in the current DWP programme. And I think empowering our citizens to be active in the decisions about themselves, to be active in creating the laws round about them, and actually influencing something that's going to bear a part in their lives going forward has been hugely important. And we've talked lots as well about lived experience. And there's an old proverb that says that you don't really understand a person until you've walked a mile in their shoes. And like many members here, I think my experience of the constituencies, I'm very humbled to realise that I've barely walked a step in some of the shoes of the people that have come to me at the most difficult time in their lives, facing problems with whether that's been through sanctions, whether it's through PIP assessments, whether it's through the stress of having to navigate a system where they have ended up in having to take loans from the DWP or from the local authority just to get by and be able to sustain and feed their families. And I think that lived experience, while we may not have it ourselves, has been so vitally important for us to understand the pressures that people are under. So I am truly hopeful that the principles that we all agreed, those of dignity and respect that we've spoken about, will be included in this new system, the new social security system, and that the Charter will reflect that and ensure the rights of our citizens going forward. If I could just say one thing, Mr Halker-Johnson's talked a lot about the qualitative information and how important that was. That's all very well, but if we don't listen to things when they go wrong, such as a system where at the moment where 50% of appeals are successful, to me that's a broken system. So it's all very well having the statistics and the information to back things up, but we have to listen when we're being shown and told that things aren't going well for our citizens. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Pauline McNeill, followed by Shona Robson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like other members, I'm proud to have been part of the process of co-designing Scotland's new social security system, a very powerful feature of our devolved settlements, and I believe it will prove to change the lives of many people. We all played a part, Scottish Government officials, the Social Security Committee itself, formerly convened by Sandra White and Claire Adamson, who played a key role, third sector organisations, so many to mention, I will mention a few that I worked with: Child Poverty Action Group, SAMH, Justice Scotland, the Health and Social Care Alliance, Marie Curie and Engender, just to name but a few. There are many more. I think we're in a reasonably good place. As Bob Doris, current convener of the Social Security Committee, said yesterday, our visit to Dundee, I think, was a historic occasion because we witnessed the very beginnings of our new Social Security agency. I think it's good for the City of Dundee and the City of Glasgow, but also for the local authorities round about those cities, that it will bring hundreds of jobs and a new way of working. We believe that it is a human right to have a certain approach to social security, one that is based on dignity and respect. So the Charter will be a meaningful one because it will be subject to regulations put before Parliament with parliamentary scrutiny approved by this Scottish Parliament. But most importantly, the Charter will be made publicly available so people can see how their rights are contained in the Charter, and hopefully, in plain English, they can see how they can enforce their rights. Citizens Advice Scotland says that the purpose of the Charter is to empower people to use it to challenge substandard service or seek redress. It's certainly one of the core principles for me. And the Charter defines what people are entitled to expect from Scotland's social security system, requiring ministers to ensure that independent advice is given and that the Charter takes into account, for the purpose of any court hearings, an amendment that Adam Tompkins, who on the committee at the time, put through, and I think an important point legally. There is some unfinished business, I think we'll all agree, and just for the benefit of the record and also for the new Minister, there's a couple of issues that I've been pursuing I would like to mention where I think more work needs to be done. So Section 53 of the Act requires the duty to inform about the possible eligibility of another benefit. So when making a determination as to an individual's entitlement for assistance, if it appears that the individual might be entitled to another benefit, then that individual must be informed. And I'd like to see that provision clearly marked out in the Charter, because I think it's a really important principle. It's not an automated benefit, but it's one that places duties on ministers to make sure that they maximise the benefits that people might be entitled to. SAMH want a specific commitment in the Charter to promote well-being, which I support, and I think it's a critical principle, part of our social security system. And East Scotland wants to ensure that the Charter is dementia-friendly by consulting carers and families. I know this is already underway. East Scotland also note that the system should not be digital by default, and I think we heard yesterday in Dundee that that's not going to be the case, and I really think that's a very, very important point, I think a very progressive one, the Government have already given a commitment to. So I think it's fair to say, with the work done by everyone previously mentioned, Scotland's social security system at the moment looks vastly different from the current UK system, and that's certainly something that I'm very happy about. The Child Poverty Action Group, amongst others, raised concerns about the redetermination process, consequently the appeal system. Evidence shows that a high proportion of people drop their claims and they do not appeal unfavourable decisions in the current system. A series of government amendments, including that the paperwork would go directly to the first-tier tribunal from a determination, I think was an important step in the right direction. But what I asked ministers for, and they agreed to in rejecting the amendments that I put down, was that we would monitor the dropout rate for appeals to make sure that people weren't simply dropping out because of the complexity of the system or a lack of advocacy. I've consistently called for ministers to ensure that there is fresh judiciary training for our new social security system, and I do believe there should be some new appointments to the tribunal system to mark its importance, because if we've changed the culture of our social security system, if we expect decision-making to change, I do think that this is the missing link in all of this. We need to make sure that we have a judiciary that has come the journey with us, because they will be making some key decisions. I remained concerned and still remain concerned about the structure of the offences and investigations. My amendments were unsuccessful, but just to lay out my concerns, a failure to notify a change in circumstances or pass on vital information for a particular claim requires that a person ought to have known, and I was concerned that that was so widely drawn. The government amended that to give a defence that if a person didn't do that reasonably, then they could rely on that. I just asked the Minister just to pay particular attention going forward, and maybe a few years hence from now, but I think we need to make sure that that provision in section 71 to 73 does not catch out people who innocently do not provide information. Presiding Officer, in the final few seconds, I just really want to say I do believe we have a statutory framework in place that appears to have the right balance of a robust and efficient system, but one which applies dignity and respect to those who are part of it and rely on it. It is the detail of the regulations, I think it was Jeremy Balfour who made this point, a really important one, that going forward it is the role of this Parliament and the Social Security Committee to make sure that all of those principles are enshrined going forward when we see the detail of those regulations. A great deal of work has gone into getting to this stage, and I fully appreciate that. It's a big moment for the country, a big moment for the Parliament. Thank you.
Call Shona Robson to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I want to pay tribute to all those who have got us to this stage in the journey to build a dignified social security system here in Scotland, including the work on the Charter. I do feel a little bit late to the party, so it was great yesterday to have the Social Security Committee in Dundee taking evidence, particularly from those with lived experience of the existing welfare system and its failings. Like many in this chamber, I've met with constituents who have been left destitute in vulnerable situations and with families on the breadline relying on food banks. And of course part of our visit yesterday was to two of the food banks in Dundee, and they shared with us some of the very difficult circumstances and what a lifeline the service they are providing is to many people. Just last week I had two constituents came to see me because of universal credit. Both had been left without a penny and are now for the first time in their lives in a situation where they have rent arrears and all of the implications of that. And despite trying to explain their current situation to the DWP and the potential risk of eviction, they were met by a cold blank wall of refusal. And of course these are not isolated incidents by any manner or means. I had another constituent whose child was ill, which resulted in them missing their appointment at the job centre, but they couldn't phone to cancel as they didn't have enough money to put credit on their phone. The following day they walked to the job centre to explain their situation, but without any discretion was sanctioned, and this family of two was left without money for 2 weeks. Members across this chamber will recognise the type of stories here. Just yesterday I met with Ewan Gurr, who many in this chamber will know and have probably had lots of dealings with. Ewan was a Trussell Trust manager not too long ago and established the Dundee Food Bank, and has witnessed firsthand the reality of policy decisions that have been made by the UK Government on welfare. And some of the statistics that Ewan told me were quite staggering. In 2012-13, the Trussell Trust Food Bank received 14,318 referrals. 1 year later, that number rose to a shocking 71,421, an increase of 499%. And I think we have to ask ourselves how, in a developed country in the 21st century, with the fifth largest economy, we can think this is acceptable. And we heard very much from the food banks yesterday about how vital their service is, but importantly what they want in the new Social Security Agency here in Scotland is a very different ethos. And so I am relieved that the Scottish Government is now taking control of some aspects of our social security system. system. I wish it was all, but it is a start. And the Charter, as it develops, I think will help to enshrine the ethos and respect. And I believe that my constituents and the rest of Scotland will have access to a compassionate, person-centred system through that agency, and treating people as people, not just another number, and treating people fairly with the dignity and respect that they deserve, and a system that people can rely on and trust, and one that is fair. So I think the Scottish Government should be commended for the hard work, and this Parliament should as well, because there's been a lot of cross-party cooperation. When Jean Freeman, as the Minister for Social Security, visited my constituency of Dundee City East last year, she visited the Brooksbank Centre, which is a charitable organisation who offer money and debt advice to people within the city. And during this visit, Jean Freeman met with a group of people who were given the opportunity to share their experiences with her directly. This, along with other similar events across Scotland, has allowed the Scottish Government to develop a bottom-up approach to the new system and has set the tone for its creation. People now feel involved in the creation of our social security system. They know it isn't just a cosmetic exercise, but one where they are actually being listened to. And organisations such as Brooksbank feel as though they've been able to directly influence how the system is shaped and how it works for our communities. Jenny Gillanders, the manager at Brooksbank, who was actually at met the committee last night, says that the feeling there and other similar projects throughout Dundee is that the Scottish Government are coming into the already established partnership networks and becoming part of the sector, not part of the problem. Ginny has told me that the information her project has been given from our new agency is concise and well organised, and that it means that they no longer have to worry about chasing payments that people are entitled to, enabling her advisers to focus on other issues in the benefit system caused by the complex UK system. And although not all of the new agency is operational yet, and we saw some of that yesterday, the expansion of the job numbers there, having a system operated locally does mean that projects such as Brooksbank can build relationships with staff and resolve issues much sooner. That partnership work is key. It's key to the ethos and culture of the new social security system, and is key to getting it right. And if we get things right now, then we can lead the way in the future and have a flagship social security system that is looked on as one of the best in the world. The new agency with its charter is off to a good start. Yesterday we saw the feedback from those who have already received the carers supplement. And I would also want to end with one of the post-its on the wall, and that was that that's a Brucey bonus. I think that sums it up, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call Jamie Green to be followed by Ruth Maguire. Mr Green, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. By 2021, Scotland will be responsible for making more social security payments in a week than we currently do in a year. This is a massive undertaking, which the former Social Security Minister called the biggest shift of powers to Scotland in over a decade. It will be no small feat and require a huge deal of preparation. The devolution of social security is undoubtedly complex, given the intertwining nature of benefits, both UK-wide and any devolved deviations. So as the Charter enters its early stages of preparation, I think there's a lot here to welcome. But from the briefing papers we've been sent as MSPs in advance of today's debate, I think there are still some areas to consider, and I hope the Minister is open to listening to those. This debate is entitled Building a Social Security System Together. Now, much has been said today about the Beveridge Report in 1942. It was a 300-page report. They only meant to print 70,000 copies, but in the end it was such an interesting piece of work that no one had really done before. They ended up printing 600,000 copies. Such was the interest in the topic of welfare. But one of the recommendations of that report I found interesting. It says that policies around social security, and I quote from the report, must be achieved by cooperation between the state and the individual, with the state securing the service and contributions. The state should not stifle incentive, opportunity and responsibility. It should leave room and encouragement for voluntary action by each individual to provide more than that minimum for himself and his family. It talks about that cooperation between state and the individual. I think it was true then, and it's still true today. Building it together couldn't be a more apt way to approach this in Scotland. The state, to those whom it seeks to help, must work together with those that it does help, if that contract between one and another is truly to work. But when a welfare system was created, it was a different world. Society has changed much since the days of Beveridge. Academia has consistently been there in the background to remind us that amongst the statistics, women, ethnic minorities and people with disabilities are represented differently when it comes to employment and welfare outcomes. Across BME groups, employment levels are lower, much lower than the national average. For example, currently 77% of Caucasians are employed, whereas only 55% of Pakistanis or Bangladeshis are employed. So if Scotland's Social Security Charter really does need to ensure that it serves all ethnicities in Scotland. The core group set up by the government includes a very welcome, diverse range of stakeholders, as those with mental and physical disabilities represented, as well as the LGBT community. But there are over 200,000 people in Scotland from a BME background. So I really hope that the adequate place is given to them as well. I welcome the creation of the experience panels, which I think were set up to gain the insights of over 2,000 people who have had experience with the system. And I think, after all, anecdotal experience from on the ground can and help shape welfare policy. Any of us who deal with welfare-related casework in our day-to-day roles will have had first-hand experience of some of these problems. And I think by default, as Jeremy Balfour said, we often deal with problems, difficulties and indeed failings in the system. But also experiences aren't always negative. I've met some excellent members of staff who've been very helpful and sympathetic with constituents in my dealings. So I think it seems practical that we should get honest and realistic feedback from those who the service is used by. It's the most direct way to learn if the decisions that we make or that ministers make are actually working on the ground. And I think we should be open to evolution. But I think it's also important that the system is accessible to all at a basic level. So I welcome decisions made that the Charter should be straightforward, using common sense language, rather than hiding behind bureaucracy or jargon or buzzwords or just niceties, as these charters often are. We should also listen to stakeholders such as Age Scotland, who highlighted that not everyone is digitally literate in Scotland, and we should make sure that copies of this are available within local communities using local authorities. The Government's position paper outlines that the Charter should also provide for strong scrutiny and accountability, and that's something that I welcome. A report from the Disability and Carers Benefit Expert Advisory Group, published at the end of last year, gave some suggestions about how that scrutiny might look. They highlighted the importance of an external body to ensure the independence of scrutiny. Given this and the wealth of evidence in favour of that, I support the prospect of an independent body, and I think the Scottish Commission on Social Security should be afforded the independence that it needs. In closing, Presiding Officer, can I reiterate the comments made at the beginning of this debate by Jeremy Balfour, that many organisations have customer charters. They sit proudly on the walls of their offices and are given out to people in nice leaflets, but the Charter should be more than that. It should be an ethos. The Minister opened today's debate by praising the consensual nature by which Scotland's social security system was introduced and agreed to. And I think that whilst we will have political differences that will set distance between us as parties, I do hope that there is an earnest and genuine will to make a success of this new agency and the people it seeks to provide for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Green. I call Ruth Maguire to be followed by Alec Rowley. Ms Maguire, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Dignity, fairness and respect are important words, they're important principles. We've used them a lot and should make no apology for that. Keeping these important principles central to everything we do is essential to avoid the mistakes of the previous system, which, despite the experience of a lucky, or some might say privileged few, is a system which has caused harm, stress and worse to countless vulnerable individuals and was described by the UN as a grave and systematic violation of human rights for those with disabilities. Now, Presiding Officer, I'm very clear that if even one person suffered the indignity described by the scores of people that the Social Security Committee heard from, by the scores of folk that come through our constituency offices, that would simply not be good enough, and that system would have to end. Dignity, fairness and respect are important. And it's also important to recognise the progress that's been made in working with the experience panels and others to develop Scotland's Social Security Charter. The historic Social Security Bill established the first UK social security system based on the principle that social security is a human right. At the time, it was really heartening to note the unequivocal support from across the Parliament and from external stakeholders alike for the broad principles and aims that underpinned the Act and the creation of our Scottish Social Security Agency. By working in partnership with the people of Scotland, by listening to, by valuing and acting on the expertise and experience of people who use the benefit system, our SNP Scottish Government are demonstrating a commitment to turn those principles into reality. The Charter is intended to turn the principles into more focused aims so that they're open to monitoring and reporting. Of course, governments, no matter how good their track record, need to be held to account. A publicly accessible charter communicating in clear terms what people are entitled to expect from our Scottish social security system helps do that. Social security is an investment in our people, it's an investment in our country. Social security is a public service. With the Charter explaining in clear terms what the new system will do to give practical effect to the principles, and by working in partnership with the people of Scotland, we can build trust and create a binding contract between the system and the people who use it. To do that, it's crucial that commitments to co-design are realised. And I would echo the assertion of Inclusion Scotland in their briefing that co-design has to be about a partnership of equals, with professionals and service users working together in an equal and reciprocal arrangement. And for disabled people to bring their important lived experience, including experience of the current benefit system, to the discussion, we have to ensure that the right support is in place and that any barriers in place which prevent them participating on an equal basis with others are removed. And I would include in that any barriers around disparity of power. And I think that we know from experience that disabled people's organisations' involvement helps effective participation. I would reflect on a recent general comment from the UN Committee of the Rights of Disabled People, which stresses the importance of state parties giving particular importance to disabled people's organisations. I'll quote it directly. Organisations of persons with disabilities should be distinguished from organisations for persons with disabilities, which provide services and/or advocate on behalf of persons with disabilities, which in practice may result in a conflict of interests, in which such organisations prioritise their purposes as private entities over the rights of the person with disabilities. State parties should give particular importance to the views of persons with disabilities through their representative organisations, support the capacity and empowerment of such organisations, and ensure that priority is given to ascertaining their views in decision-making processes. And I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's comments read the further work around targeted groups to increase diversity. Another issue that was raised by Inclusion Scotland, though, was around whether the core group is sufficiently representative of different types of impairment, particularly learning disabled people or people with other cognitive impairments, such as autism, to ensure that the Charter reflects their needs. Now, I accept and recognise that with a small group of around 30, there will be challenges around publishing details of particular protected characteristics. However, I'd welcome some comment, some reassurance from the CABSEC on this in her summing up. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I think that it's clear that the Scottish Government are going way beyond warm words when it comes to putting dignity, respect and fairness at the heart of our social security system. Having expressed provision for the Charter on the face of the Act, the commitment to the rights-based approach is clear. The Charter gives practical effect to the important social security principles and evidences that the SNP Government will treat people with dignity and respect. Principles into action to make lives better. I'll finish by simply thanking all of those involved in this very important work. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Maguire. I call Alec Rowley to be followed by Alistair Allen. Mr Rowley, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The progress being made with the introduction of the new social security powers in Scotland has been commendable, and I consider the inclusive approach to the design of the social security system to be groundbreaking. For those who have not experienced what it's like to try and access support through the social security system, the film I, Daniel Blake was surely an eye-opener and is a clear demonstration of why those who use the system need to be at the heart of not only designing the new system but also being able to continue to feedback on how that system works in practice. Developing the Social Security Charter is just the next step in that groundbreaking process, and it is therefore important that the approach of inclusiveness and engagement continues. I believe that by taking the much welcome principles that sit behind the Social Security Act, the social security system in Scotland, and setting these out in the Social Security Charter, we will empower the users of the system, as well as the staff who deliver on a daily basis, and the organisations who support people that have a need for support. Presiding Officer, the Social Security Scotland Act 2018 gives the following formal functions to the Charter, requiring ministers to ensure that independent advice is available on the Charter's content as part of advice on social security issues, enabling it to be taken into account by the courts and tribunals on relevant matters, requiring ministers to report annually on what they have done to meet the expectations set out in the Charter, and requiring the Scottish Commission on Social Security to report on how the Charter is being fulfilled and make recommendations for improvements. Citizens Advice Scotland state it is of the utmost importance that the Charter is ensuring that it is not just words. The Charter must strengthen the guiding principles by embedding them into the system in a practical sense. The Charter should be used for training all staff who will come into contact with those needing support from the system, and in doing so will support staff to deliver on the agreed principles. To empower people, the Charter must be clear, accessible and well advertised. People who do not receive the service they are entitled to should be able to use the Charter to challenge substandard service and seek redress. Citizens Advice Scotland are right when they say empowering people who require support is in the best interest of the whole system. When service falls short of the necessary standard, people who know their rights can challenge this, which in turn helps to ensure that a high-quality level of service is maintained. Why is this important? I think it's important that we always make clear that social security is an investment in the people of Scotland. It's an investment in the communities of Scotland, and it is an investment in the wider economy of Scotland. The principle that the social security system is to contribute to reducing poverty in Scotland is one I'm sure all of Scotland supports. However, that is dependent on the ability and willingness of the government of the day to raise the finances and commit the resources. I believe that one of the most alarming developments of modern-day Scotland is the rising levels of child poverty in Scotland. Nearly 2 in 5 children face the prospect of poverty in Scotland by the end of the next decade. This represents a near 50% rise in the number of child poor from today, and almost doubling since 2010. 400,000 children will be in poverty by the end of the 2020s. This is a figure far higher than even the Thatcher major years when child poverty rocketed. As the Institute of Public Policy Research recently said, the scale of the financial challenge of reducing child poverty will likely need concerted action for many years, requiring a combination of increased earnings for the poorest households through inclusive growth and increases in social security payments. The figures, shocking and alarming, but confirmed in the Joseph Rowntree report on Scotland published today, which highlights the scale of poverty and should make us both sad and angry. While today half the children, 56%, in out-of-work families are in poverty, the figure will exceed 90% by the late 2020s. As the report says, the escalating poverty crisis is driven by substantial cuts to social security benefits and tax credits and the introduction of universal credit, which will be rolled out by 2023. So while I accept that we cannot mitigate all the ills of Tory welfare policy and failed Tory austerity, I suggest that tackling the growing levels of child poverty will be essential to achieve the principles that sit behind the Scottish social security system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Rowley. I call Alistair Allen to be followed by Alexander Stewart. Mr Allen, please.
Presiding Officer, as members know, many constituents facing sometimes dire situations come to their MSPs for help with benefits issues. They do so and will continue to do so regardless of whether the benefit in question is devolved or not. With the devolution of a number of benefits to this place, however, at least in one limited respect, it can be said that the actual powers of Holyrood have caught up with the expectations that their constituents rightly have of a Parliament. I want to say something about how the benefits now devolved to us should operate, and on that I hope there might be a more than usual degree of consensus, at least in some things. We should consider, as is being considered, what principles we are starting from and what lessons we can learn from the social security system as it has operated up till now. These principles are a good point to work from. They are principles born not merely out of consultation with service users, but, as others have mentioned, out of genuine co-design. These are principles endorsed unanimously by this Parliament and set on the face of an Act. So now we have a rare opportunity to try to get it right, at least for the 15% or so of the social security system that is being devolved to Scotland's control. And that means translating these principles into a social security charter. But it is important to say that the charter is more than merely a general statement of goodwill. The Scottish Government and its agencies will not only be measured against the Charter, but organisations who believe the system is failing will be able to use the Charter to make that point. The idea of social security as a rights-based system founded in ideas of human dignity is a radical idea. Indeed, it is arguably a radical departure from the ideas of social security that have gone before, which come from a system historically derived ultimately from ideas about things like a deserving and an undeserving poor. So writing a charter now provides an opportunity for something better, something more clearly founded on ideas of human dignity and equality. I want, in doing that, to mention one group with a particular importance in my part of Scotland, and that is namely those benefiting from cold weather payments. Now, at least 5 or 6 of our starting principles could be invoked as reasons for my raising this issue. I've raised the issue of cold weather payments on numerous occasions in the past with the UK Government, and like other members in the west of Scotland, I recognise that the current threshold for the payment of cold weather payments is very high, or if we are thinking of it strictly in temperature terms, very low. The temperature in any area has to fall below freezing for 7 nights in a row before the payments are triggered. And on the west coast of Scotland, this is of course something of a rarity, and yet areas like my own have some of the worst levels of fuel poverty in Europe. Now, there are many explanations for this to do with housing type and so on, and much work is being done by the Scottish Government, it should be said, to address these problems. However, another factor is of course wind chill. The weather which hits the west coast in the winter may not be literally freezing, but it certainly feels like it. So I would again make a case for all of us to think about the questions that arise around the arguments for wind chill to be taken into account when payments are calculated, and to look at those seriously as we think about the principles for our new system. Presiding Officer, as many members have pointed out, we have to build a new social security system that is based on people's lived experience of the existing one. There will be an estimated £3.7 billion fall by 2021 in payments in Scotland of the benefits which are administered at the UK level. That is a huge slice out of the incomes of hundreds of thousands of Scots, which no amount of mitigation by this Parliament can possibly make up. And as members will have seen from evidence provided by organisations including Engender and others, between 2010 and 2020, 86% of net savings along those lines will come from women's incomes. So these provide huge issues for us to think about as we think about how the devolved benefits relate to those which still operate across the UK. And, Presiding Officer, that may all be a debate for another day, but we will continue as MSPs to get inquiries, as I say, about both devolved and reserved benefits. And in the case of Scotland, I hope that our Charter will ensure that there is a system which is at least accountable and listening and founded in meaningful guiding principles, principles which I hope are shared across this chamber.
Thank you very much, Dr Allen. I call Alexander Stewart to be followed by George Adam. Mr Adam will be the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Stewart, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am delighted to be able to take part in today's debate on Scotland's Social Security Charter. With 30% of working age benefits being devolved to Holyrood, as well as additional powers to top up existing benefits to create new ones, this gives us a very exciting opportunity, and many speakers have talked about that this afternoon. But also, it's important that there is a responsibility that comes to considering how we deal with a distinctive welfare system in Scotland, with options that look at serving and in securing the best we need for the people within Scotland. The inclusion of the Social Security Charter within the Social Security Act is very much welcome, Deputy Presiding Officer. Not only was it set out with the Scottish Ministers what is expected of them forming the Social Security policy, it would also be developed in consultation with the people who rely on different types of social security on a day-to-day basis. So the key people who are actually needing the service need to be part of that process. And the approach of engaging with a broad range of people designing this new welfare system is the right one to take. While the core group drew upon a wide experience of panel individuals who are mixed receipt of a range of different types of benefit and their different gender and different locations, I was a little bit surprised before the debate started today about the lack of young people and ethnic minorities. So I'm delighted to see that the Cabinet Secretary has now brought that in case, because I do think that is the right thing to do, that we broaden the net as wide as we can to incorporate and include as many people as we can in this whole process. It's also important to find out what the social security support mechanisms are there, and notwithstanding some of the concerns that there are, the recommendations that is here seem to be sensible, they are reasonable, and they are appropriate. And that's what people want to see, something that deals with them on a day-to-day basis. People want the system to treat clients fairly, the system to treat clients with respect, and they want staff to be appropriate, kind and understanding, and the system itself is clear, simple and easy to navigate. These are the priorities that must be taken within this process, and I'm glad to see that many of these are being followed, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm sure that it's the support mechanisms that are put in place, and we will get support from not within this chamber, but outside the chamber, if we are prepared to take that seriously and tackle it head on. And I think today that the Social Security Charter is doing exactly that. We do, however, need to bear in mind that no matter how strong Scotland's Social Security Charter may be, it will depend how well it is implemented. It will depend on how far it goes and what it does to ensure people get that respect. And the conclusions that have come forward from individuals must be taken into account to ensure that the system is proper and the management systems are in place. But there are some real issues about the implementation. And I need to talk about what Audit Scotland talked about when they looked at where we were. They reported early in the year that the implementation of the Scottish welfare system would cost, and that would have an impact. And that may well, the Scottish Government may well have underestimated some of that impact. So that needs to be solved if that problem has been identified. And I'm sure that the Scottish Government will take that on board. Moreover, the new body that we're going to have will require many staff, and I know the Scottish Government has already transferred a number of individuals to cope with that system, to ensure that the staff are in place and the project. But also Audit Scotland highlighted concerns over the necessity of staff numbers that could be recruited in time to make sure everything was devolved. So once again, that needs to be looked at to ensure that we can achieve the goals that we're setting ourselves. We want this to work effectively and we want this to work for everybody. But Audit Scotland have a role to play in advising and coming up with some possibilities that could cause us concerns for the future. And then when we talk about an IT system that might have to be involved, that we already know, Presiding Officer, that the track record of the Scottish Government on IT has been difficult. We can just look at Police Scotland or farm payments or NHS. So I leave that there. That is an area. We need to ensure that things are fit for purpose. And I'm sure that will be looked at and that will be addressed as we go forward, because that's vitally important. There are some really positive progress that's being made, and I commend and congratulate for what we are doing, and the people who've sat on the panels, the core groups who have taken part in ensuring that this charter will be a success. And I have no doubt that the charter will be a success, but it has to be the culture of that success that works for all. We must keep in mind the difficulties of setting up a new system, and we also must keep in mind that that has to work for all. So we in the Scottish Conservatives are very supportive of what is taking place, but we will hold the government to account if things don't work. Surely.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, I'm very heartened to hear Alexander Stewart's comments about co-production and how valuable that is. I wonder if Alexander Stewart would recommend that to his colleagues in Westminster for the DWP to take the same process and make the same progress that we've made in Scotland.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank you for that comment. My colleagues in Westminster, I am fully aware of what they are trying to achieve, and they do that. I am aware of that situation. But you make a valid comment, and one that we can all work to try and achieve. But as I say, they are taking that on board. So I pay tribute, Deputy Presiding Officer, to all who have worked on the committee so far in this. I pay tribute to the panels that have taken place. We all want this to work for individuals who require support. The Act that we put forward in this Parliament was pioneering, and it should be. So I support that, and I support everything that's been said today. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Stewart. An immaculate speech, apart from the fact that you used the term you. I will persist in correcting members on this. I'm now going to call George Adam, last speaker in the open debate, moving to closing speeches afterwards. Mr Adam, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I, like colleagues, welcome this debate, and it comes in the back of a lot of work from all the members of the Social Security Committee. I particularly liked Pauline McNeill's opening, being those of us on the committee, being co-producers of this Social Security system. But of course, Presiding Officer, my own natural humility would stop me from making that statement myself. But Pauline McNeill is 100% right. The Social Security Act was a creation of all of us in this place and those outside it who contributed through the experience panels. Presiding Officer, this Social Security Charter goes beyond warm words. It goes beyond listening to people for the sake of it and beyond the usual government practice of top-down ideas. This is a social security system created in conjunction with those that use it. This is the Social Security Charter creates a binding contract between the system and the people of Scotland. This is not some framed document that will hang in the wall of a Social Security Scotland's office and gather dust. It is a working document, a living document that builds the very foundations of our social security system. It sets out what people in Scotland can expect and are entitled to from our new system. The Act requires the development of a charter that reflects the 8 social security principles set out in Section 1 of the Act. During the Bill's progression, Ministers committed to producing the Charter, working with people with experience of social security. The Charter is intended to turn the principles into more focused aims so that they are open to monitoring, reporting and scrutiny. But more importantly, the Scottish Government has not just listened to, but acted on the wishes of those with lived experience. The very naming of the Charter was brought by the core group discussions, and their clear preference was for the Scottish Social Security Charter. The format of it had to be accessible and ensure that it did what it set out to do. If there's one thing I've learned, Presiding Officer, during my time in local government and here in the Scottish Parliament, is whether it's the civil service or council officers, they all like to write long reports and papers. But this is so much more important. These has to be long, but it also has to be short enough for people to be able to understand. It has to be able to be grasped by individuals so that they know exactly what their right is with this document. These were all things that the core group brought up and shows once again how valuable their input was. The principles of the Charter are important, and as politicians, we love principles. Some of us have them and value them. Others, we can only hope they catch up with the rest of us someday. But overall, finding was that all the principles separately had important aspects and meanings to the core group, but there is also a significant overlap. They came up with a list of 45 statements that explained what the principles mean in practice, and these statements can be grouped into 5 themes, and I think, Presiding Officer, is an important part of the debate. Number 1 was clients. As the people involved, dignity and respect should not just be words. The clients should be first and foremost most important in the whole process. Number 2, staff behaviour. Ensure that those delivering these services do so in a way that is helpful to those that are claiming. And 3, processes. Ensuring that they're open, transparent and not a hindrance during people's time of need. And 4 is the social security system itself, and 5, the wider culture of social security in Scotland should be a positive one. For me, the most important aspects of all of this is the process of consultation and co-design that help build trust in the Scottish social security system. Trust in a benefit system is something that there has not been a lot of recently with the UK government's so-called reforms. This has been an important part of the exercise, and it's only right that people feel that trust between the system and themselves when they go through the process. The Equality and Human Rights Commission noted the co-production model can help develop positive working relationships between claimants and frontline staff, and that, Presiding Officer, is an important part of the debate as well. The Act sets out 8 principles for the Scottish Social Security. Although all valid, my particular favourites are that the Scottish Social Security is an investment in the people of Scotland. During their time of difficulty, during their time of need, we are there to support them. 2, the Social Security itself is a human right and essential to the realisations of other human rights. And also the fact that respect and dignity of individuals is to be at the heart of the Scottish security system. For too long, these things have just been words and not actually been used in other processes with the DWP. And the Scottish social security system is to contribute to reducing poverty in Scotland. It's an important part of how we build a better future as well. Presiding Officer, this is some of the largest legislation that this Scottish Parliament has produced. It affects so many people in our country and can be used as a tool to bring people and families out of poverty. But before all that, you need to state the rules and regulations. People need to understand what their rights are. It needs to be done in a way that people can understand and appreciate. It is my belief that the Scottish Social Security Charter does all of these things. It gives hope to our fellow Scots that our Scottish Government listens to what you say and appreciates your contribution. And as I've often said in this chamber, Presiding Officer, politics is about people. And if we put them first, we can and will deliver the type of Scotland we all want to live in.
Thank you very much, Mr Adam. Closing speeches. I call on Mark Griffin to close for Labour. Mr Griffin, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased that we've had a chance today to agree or support for the progress being made to deliver Scotland's new social security system. The Charter, its co-design, parliamentary approval and the human rights-based approach are key to realising dignity, fairness and respect in the system, a marked change from what we have now. And crucially, it will ensure that we deliver on the law we agreed in April. Though it should embed all the principles in a way that is understandable in plain English, the Charter is a key way of realising a core principle of the social security system. The social security system is to be designed with the people of Scotland on the basis of evidence. The Charter is, of course, about people and their rights. To be effective, the Charter has to clearly state social security recipients' rights, setting out how to complain when things go wrong, and they will, and who to complain to. And though my attempt to amend the Act to pay due regard to the Covenant on Economic and Social Rights was not accepted by all members on the committee, the Charter should also embed another core principle, that social security is itself a human right and essential to the realisation of other human rights. We've heard today about the importance of ensuring that the Charter should be rooted in panel principles, a call made in the Alliance's briefing. Jeremy Balfour echoed Kaz and indeed my earlier comments that other individuals or organisations with an interest should be consulted as part of the scrutiny process. Pauline McNeill spoke about the parliamentary approval ahead, and like her, I would be keen for the Cabinet Secretary to spell out the intended timetable for that. Alistair Allen mentioned the issue around cold weather payments in his constituents, and similarly in central Scotland we have the position where residents in Coatbridge and Airdrie have their weather conditions taken by two separate weather stations, one in Silsborough, one in Bishopton. So we have two houses side by side together with each other, where one house received 4 cold weather payments last winter and one only received 2. I think that's something that the Cabinet Secretary could look at, and I welcome Dr Allen's comments around that, and hopefully that's something we could all work together on. And in their briefing, the Alliance suggested Parliament considers extending the time to develop the Charter to ensure that the process is led by free, meaningful, active and informed participation and not overly driven by time constraints. And on that, I would welcome the Cabinet Secretary's response. Our amendment refers to the process being one that is ongoing, something that echoes Sam H's call that the Charter should be considered as a live document. And as I've said, we on these benches would like to see a push to recruit more members to the panels, which could encourage more hard-to-reach groups to come on board and for that process to be more open. And I hope the Cabinet Secretary agrees, because I think there is room to improve. In June, the Cabinet Secretary's predecessor, Jean Freeman, told me that almost 1,000 of the 2,400 experienced panel members have failed to engage since that initial recruitment. And that suggests that something is not quite fully worked as part of that programme, for which £300,000 has been invested to date. Anecdotal comments about the nature of the short, sharp research and the timings and methods of engagement suggest that the work could be better built around members. And to underline the point that I've made today, that the panel should be designed with people as opposed to for them, or otherwise built around the needs of the Scottish Government. And opening up the panels further, making more up-to-date information available, perhaps through Social Security Scotland's excellent new website, could make them more accessible with earlier notice and with greater detail of forthcoming work, but also providing more live details of the feedback coming out of them could increase the value and the engagement with the panels further. The recently published Experience Panels research plan says that we should expect reports on the funeral expenses assistance service design, the carers allowance supplement letters and the PIP assessment process this autumn. But on all 3 counts, Government have either published its draft regulations, sent the letters, or last week confirmed its position on the assessment processes. So I think there's a question as to how the experience panels will then feed into those particular entitlements. Presiding Officer, in May and June, Jean Freeman responded to questions from Pauline McNeill and Daniel Johnson that mobility criteria was under active consideration, but the plan doesn't include that. And the questions about offering mobility to over 65s and reinstating the 20-metre rule are key priorities for us, and I hope the Minister can confirm that they are very much under consideration by the panel. And earlier, I reminded the Chamber the effect of Tory reforms, disabled people losing £190 million from PIP alone, and that the figures uncovered showing 50,000 people have had to suffer a second PIP assessment under the revolving door of reviews. This summer I've been asking for people's views on what social security likes that at roundtables and local meetings, and asking disability organisations and disabled people themselves what their priorities are. Because when the time comes to consider the replacement for PIP and carers allowance, the rules, criteria and rates of benefits, it is vitally important that the people of Scotland will have their chance to deliver a social security system founded on dignity, fairness and respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Griffin. I call on Michelle Ballantyne to close the Conservatives. Ms Ballantyne, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I hope that at decision time tonight we will have consensus on today's motions and amendments. And as such, I would echo the Cabinet Secretary's opening statements that this Parliament has, must and will work together to deliver a social security system that works for the people. None of us doubt the importance of getting the approach and the content of Social Security Charter right. The proposal came from the people, and we have a duty to deliver a meaningful response to the requirement in the Act. Inevitably, of course, much of the conversation on the development of the Charter will, of course, be about the language. So unusually, I want to start with a quote from the Unison briefing. Unison have made clear that they don't like the term customer, but they said this: more fundamentally, whether those using the systems are claimants, users or customers, and whether they are receiving benefits, entitlements or citizen supplements, or whether they receive information via email, text or in person, the crucial factor is how much money people are receiving. No level of semantic sensitivity or personalised user-friendly service will allow for the system to meet principles of dignity and respect. So in creating a social security charter, we must be sensitive to the expectations we are raising and our ability to deliver. And this concern was also noted by Alex Cole-Hamilton. Both Jamie Green and Alex Cole-Hamilton highlighted the principles on which social security was established, reminding us that Beveridge was clear that in delivering security, we should not stifle incentive, opportunity and responsibility, and we must leave room for encouragement for voluntary action by each individual to provide more for their family. My colleague Jeremy Balfour talked eloquently about the role of the Charter and the importance of it being more than words, of its role in clarifying expectations and holding agencies to account. He reminded us of the legal importance, that the Charter is not about individual rights, but the principles on which Scottish social security system will operate. I was also grateful to Jamie Halcrow-Johnson for touching upon the importance of tangible outcomes with regards to the Charter, as well as raising the comments on PIP and ESA independent reviews at UK level. And I hope the Cabinet Secretary will address some of the questions Mr Halcrow-Johnson raised. It is, as Jamie Green highlighted, vitally important that current levels of scrutiny continue to be applied to benefits once they are devolved, and the Charter can provide the mechanism for that, whether in relation to ensuring geographical equality or as an opportunity to provide ongoing improvement to the system. Presiding Officer, many members this afternoon have acknowledged and welcomed the co-design approach that is being taken. And as Bob Doris, Shona Robson and other members of the Social Security Committee mentioned, our visit to Dundee was about listening and gaining an understanding of the experiences of those who use the system. Communication in design and communication in delivery is vital. As Pauline McNeill and others have mentioned, it is important that the Scottish social security system is not digital by default, and Age Scotland's briefing reminded us that the Scottish Household Survey found that 67% of those aged 75 and over don't use the internet. I believe we all welcome the Cabinet Secretary's announcement that the membership of experienced panels has been expanded to be more representative, as it is important that a broad range of voices is captured. Alexander Stewart spoke insightfully on the need for broader representation on the core group, and hearing from those people who have had positive experiences is important, not least to try and understand why it worked for them and not for others. Presiding Officer, if the Charter is really to provide a guiding influence on our system, then we need to get it in place. Ideally, it would have been in place already prior to the delivery of benefits to ensure consistency across the board, particularly as, in the Scottish Government's own words, the agency complaints and appeals procedures will also be strongly reflective on the values and standards set out in the Charter. This document will form a key tool for those seeking redress, so it is important that we get it in place as soon as possible. So on a final note, When reading through Friday's report, I was struck by one comment in particular from a member of the core group. It was the suggestion that the Charter be placed conspicuously right in the eye line of Social Security Scotland staff that are dealing directly with the public. I believe if we truly wish this Charter to succeed, we must be proud of it. As Alexander Stewart said, this is key. The respect we build through being proud of it is what will take it forward. It is a symbol of collaboration between service users and staff and government, a common touch point they can all refer to, and a guideline on what to expect once they cross the agency's threshold. I think the suggestion of an eye-line charter is a good start and a contribution that should be borne in mind as this charter takes place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Ballantyne. I call on Shirley-Ann Somerville to close the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary to decision time or thereabouts, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome today's debates and the contributions that we have had. I think it befits the importance of the Charter that we've been trying to, and have indeed succeeded to achieve, a great deal of consensus today. I'd like to thank the members who contributed and spoke very supportively of the work that the Scottish Government has been doing, but more importantly, the work of the experience panels and our stakeholders in bringing this to life. And I repeat that this work is fundamental to the wider necessity that we have as we develop our social security system about building trust with the people of Scotland. We need to demonstrate through our actions that we will honour the trust by delivering on our commitment to do things better. And in my opening remarks, I spoke about my genuine desire to carry on the collaborative approach that was clearly established by my predecessor through the progress of the bill, and I'm pleased that that has continued today. Of course, we won't agree on everything, but I do think it has been made clear today that we do agree about the nature of this new public service and about the role of the Charter in it. And with that in mind, I am pleased to support Mark Griffin's amendment to the motion. I very much agree that this is a process that should be an exemplar of co-production, and that we should continue to work to expand the diversity of those participating in co-design. Mark Griffin talked a great deal about the importance of co-design, and quite rightly. It is their system, as he said, not something that's been done to them. And that's why I do take very seriously the comments that he, Jamie Green and others have made, for example, around the issue that no members from black minority ethnic communities were on the original core group. We do have to ask ourselves why people from certain communities didn't come forward to be part of that. And that is very much a process that I'm open to. We need to learn lessons from this innovative process that we are doing in co-design, because I want to do this better in the future. Interestingly enough, we are also having a great deal of interest from other administrations and governments about how we are carrying out our co-design work on this, and I think it speaks to the innovative nature of what we are trying to do here. So very much open to learning lessons and learning them quickly. Ruth Maguire and Jeremy Balfour also raised issues about the representative nature of the core group. As I think Ruth Maguire herself pointed out, there are difficulties about talking about the protected characteristics of a group of 30 people, but I hope I can reassure her that we do include people with a disability, including mental, physical and learning, men and women, a range of ages, people with different sexual orientations, people who are married or in civil partnerships, different religious beliefs, experience of all relevant benefits, people with fluctuating conditions, people with hearing impairments, people with visual impairments, carers of both adults and disabled children, rural and urban dwellers, and people with more than one of those characteristics, obviously, as well. We are working closely with stakeholders to ensure that the views of people from certain health groups or underrepresented groups are included in the work that we do within the Charter. I'm also very pleased to say that we will be supporting Jeremy Balfour's amendment tonight as well, considering how we might include the views of organisations and individuals within the work that we are doing. Very much from the beginning of the principles and of the Charter, they have been a product of wide consultation and engagement. and I'm committed to doing my part through the co-design process to have focused discussions with stakeholders. We do already have our stakeholder group of 27 organisations, and many are also meeting with officials. The officials' door and my door always will be open to those with an interest in our system and a wish to contribute to that. Jeremy Balfour and others spoke about why have a charter and that it has to be more than a bunch of words, and I absolutely agree with him on that. George Adam talked about this being a working document, a living document, and also I completely concur with that. The interim report that was published at the end of last week has a great deal of work that has gone behind it. It is an iterative process. We are early in that process, but I can assure Jeremy Balfour and others that this is a very open process. There is much capacity building that has gone on with the core group to ensure that it absolutely is not officials sitting saying, what do you think about our ideas, but very much led from the core group themselves. The Charter we expect to be able to lay before Parliament before the end of its year. It's not for me, obviously, Presiding Officer, to judge how Parliament will settle a timetable from that, but I am obviously open to the committee and to opposition parties for suggestions about how we can take that process forward. Jeremy Balfour also discussed and asked me about the delivery of other benefits, and we will be taking responsibility for all benefits by the end of the parliamentary term. We will be moving forward with policy, for example, on PIP, and that is ongoing through our experience panels and the expert advisory group, and the regulations will come in due course after that. Patrick Harvey raised a very important point that I think we should always reflect on, is about how did we get here, that we have a system that is so absolutely mistrusted by both the people who use it and indeed anyone that hears anything about it. And that is exactly why, as he correctly points out, that this system, our new system, must be developed on the lived experience of those. That will be at the heart of everything we do. It will be first, it will be last, and it will be always what we will consider as we develop the social security system. Alec Cole-Hamilton also asked the government to look very carefully at the experience of stakeholders and their expertise, and I would absolutely agree with him on that. As I've already mentioned, we have a stakeholder group that is working to advise the core group, and discussions with officials are happening. Bob Doris, Shona Robertson and others spoke very eloquently about the consequences of the current system. My own constituency, mailbag and surgeries also bring that home, as I'm sure it does to all members. But I'm particularly mindful of the visit that I made to Inclusion Scotland immediately before I gave my statement last week, and speaking directly to people about what impact our policy decisions will have on their everyday life. It is always humbling for us to remember that the decisions that we take in this chamber will make a real difference to people, and I am determined to ensure that that is a positive difference for people who have been exceptionally scarred from their experience of the current system. That's why it's important that we recognise what we're doing here. We're designing a new system. We aren't tinkering around the edges of the current system. And that's why the culture in the new agency is so important. And I'm delighted to hear from a number of members about their experience when they went up to visit the agency headquarters in Dundee yesterday. It's an experience which I had greatly enjoyed as well, because you can tell from the Chief Executive, from the senior management to all the client advisors, that they genuinely get that they are doing something different and momentous here in Scotland, and they are part of something historic, and very proud of that. And I hope and expect that that will be reflected in everything that they do as they deal with people on a one-to-one basis. Claire Adamson talked again about the need for vision and the type of society we want to have, and that will be embedded, I know, in the culture that we will have. Pauline McNeill mentioned a number of parts of her unfinished business, probably too many for me able to go through in the time that I have, but I'm more than happy to meet Ms McNeill and discuss some of or all of those with her. But can I reassure her that I will look very carefully at what she said around the appeals process, for example, and the investigation offences and investigations. She did raise some suggestions about what would go into the Charter. It is too early for me to say what should go into the Charter at this point, and I'll allow the core group to comment on that before I do. Presiding Officer, just in conclusion, I was heartened by the fact that many of the members endorsed the findings from the core group that we've had so far. Our intention, as I say, is to submit the first Charter for parliamentary approval by the end of the year. But in many ways, that's the beginning rather than the end of the process. If approval is granted, we then move on to implementation and ensuring that that Charter is meaningfully delivered. As Mark Griffin, Patrick Harvey, Claire Adamson and many others mentioned today, the importance of the Charter and what we are doing in social security is to ensure that the people's voices will now be heard. I would add to that as well that their voices will now be heard, and then this Government and this Parliament will act upon them to ensure that we have a social security system that we can truly be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our debate on building a social security system together. Now, before we move on to the next item of business, members may recall that the Commission on Parliamentary Reform proposed that time be set aside during meetings of the Parliament for significant announcements from committees on urgent inquiries or to set out the findings of recently published reports. And as agreed by the Parliamentary Bureau, we're going to be trialling this up to Christmas. And in that context, I'm pleased to call on Bruce Crawford, convener of the Finance and Constitution Committee, to make an announcement on common UK frameworks. Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the convener of the Finance and Constitution Committee, I welcome this new opportunity for parliamentary committees to highlight the work they are undertaking. The Commission on Parliamentary Reform are to be commended for making such a useful recommendation. On the first occasion of this new procedure being used, I'd like to bring members' attention to the important inquiry the committee is undertaking into common frameworks. In October last year, the UK and devolved governments agreed that it would be beneficial to establish post-Brexit common approaches across the UK in policy areas such as justice, the environment, health, as well as agriculture and fisheries. These areas where common policy approach is currently being delivered by virtue of the United Kingdom being a member state of the EU. The principles underpin these agreements have been agreed by the governments, including to enable the function of the UK internal market while acknowledging policy divergence, to ensure the UK can negotiate and implement new trade agreements and international treaties, and to safeguard the security of the UK. So these common frameworks should matter to us all here at Holyrood, as the impact on the policy approaches we scrutinise and will be asked to vote on in future. I know that colleagues in other committees have also been looking at this significant issue. It's vitally important that this Parliament, as well as Civic Scotland, NGOs and other wider stakeholders, etc., have a role in helping to shape and influence the development and agreement of these common frameworks. So in June this year, the Finance Committee began our inquiry seeking written views. We've since complemented this work with a fact-finding visit to Brussels, where we learned that meaningful engagement undertaken early and often was vital to ensure success in finding agreement. We will also hold a roundtable discussion in committee on the 21st of October, as well as hosting a conference together with other partners at the Royal Society of Edinburgh on the 2nd of November. Key sectoral representatives have been invited from across the UK, as well as from UK and devolved parliaments and governments. These frameworks are being developed right now, so the Finance and Constitution Committee will look to publish its findings as early as possible. This in order to ensure that the Committee and Parliament are involved in helping to shape the direction and development of these frameworks at an early stage as possible. I hope that members will find the Committee's ongoing work and the final report we will produce useful in regard to their own involvement in the development of common frameworks. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Crawford. And we turn now to decision time. There are 4 questions this evening. The first question is that motion 14142 in the name of Ruth Davidson on a motion of condolence be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. The next question is that amendment 14160.1 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, which seeks to amend motion 14160 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on building a social security system together, co-designing the social security charter, be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. The next question is that amendment 14160.2 in the name of Mark Griffin, which seeks to amend motion 14160 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville, be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. And the final question is that motion 14160 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville as amended is agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. That concludes decision time. We'll move now to members' business, or in a few moments, members' business in the name of Oliver Mundell on the cycle to Syracuse to mark...